I'll let you know as well.
Could I ask a member of staff to reach out to the vice mayor? Thank you.
And Chair Cormack, we are now live.
Wonderful. Good afternoon and welcome to the Finance Committee's meeting of Tuesday, May 4th. This is a special meeting. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, of course. Vice Mayor Burt.
Here.
Chair Cormack.
Here.
Councilmember Filseth.
Here.
Three present.
Thank you to the clerk. We now move to oral communications. Just as a reminder I see we have a number of attendees today. This is a time when you may address the Finance Committee on something that is not on the agenda. So just to be clear, if you're here to talk about the Junior Museum and Zoo, that will be next. If you're here to talk about the Stanford University Medical Fund, that will be thereafter. And please keep in mind that we're discussing an overview of the budget, item 3. So with that caveat, if the clerk could please assist anyone who wants to provide comments during oral communications.
Yes, of course. If anyone of the public would like to speak on anything that's not on the agenda item, please raise your hand on the Zoom app or press *9. And currently we have Marcia Pugsley followed by Rebecca Eisenberg. Marcia, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes on the timer.
Thank you very much. I'm Marcia Pugsley and I live at Channing House and have been involved in the Arts Center for the last 15 years. And I happen to be on the 50th anniversary of the Arts Center because that's coming up for a celebration. And I was inspired to notice that National Public Radio also is celebrating their 50th year. And I thought how visionary things were back 50 years to have these types of programs and services offered to our citizens. But I'm wanting to talk about, of course, the budget and a request of having no further reductions for the Arts Center. I'm really advocating for that. I do understand that there is both fiscal and emotional and mental recovery that's needed after this pandemic year. And I thought that Council Member Greer spoke well about that last evening. But there is, I think, a fiscal point inside to one of the cuts that they're now proposing for the Art Center, which is to eliminate exhibitions. That's one of the ones that brings in really a high number of donations. Additionally, there are programs like Project Look, where school districts within Palo Alto, as well as in the whole area, pay to come to the Art Center to see the latest exhibition, take part in activities, so that that's a revenue stream that could be lost out. And there's also just the classes that are there. The exhibitions are one area where the students, whether they're the 3-year-olds or the adults who are taking classes, go for inspiration. And so that we seem to be maybe cutting off our noses to spite our face by having that kind of a reduction. During this pandemic year, the Art Center has been incredibly active in providing services for children all the way up to seniors. They provided some very—
Yes, Marcia, sorry to interrupt, but can you finish your thought? Your 2 minutes are up now.
Yes, they've been doing a lot, providing testing sites, voting sites. So they've been such a key part of our community. Please don't make further cuts.
I'm just going to, thank you so much. Let me just remind the people who have their hands up for oral communications, if you wish to speak to us about the budget, that will be item 3. So if you want to speak about the budget today, please lower your hand and you can put it back up again for item 3. Again, this is for anything not on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Cormack. And our next speaker is Ms. Rebecca Eisenberg. Ms. Eisenberg, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Well, Councilperson Cormack, it actually, in my opinion, everything involves the budget. But sure enough, I'll speak about two items that are not on the budget or on this agenda. And despite many promises for many years that they would be. The first, of course, is the business tax. And you heard me speak a little bit about it last night, especially San Francisco's literally famous and extraordinarily successful overpaid executive tax. It is on track to bring in, as I said, anywhere from 200 million to up, simply by taxing companies that pay their top executives more than 100 times the median salary of the employee base. Now, for sure, a company like Tesla that made $140 billion for Elon Musk last year, according to Bloomberg, and you can confirm that, on top of another 60 billion this year so far. Certainly, that company can afford to pay taxes to the city that was and is its home and nurtured it from zero. I cannot for the life of me understand why you'd rather cut the Children's Museum and Children's Library and all the other things and put bikers at risk rather than ask Elon Musk to pay his taxes. The other thing that's still not on the budget, confoundingly, is the $12 million that the city owes as a matter of law under a court judgment to pay the utilities ratepayers. I received my letter yesterday. Maybe you all did too. The city owes us money. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eisenberg. And our next speaker is Nielsen Buchanan. Nielsen, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Well, thank you. I have a question, a point of order. I cannot find the Palo Alto TMA in the budget. So I just want to speak to the fact I hope that it will be in the budget discussions that you have. If it's indeed going to be there, I don't need to make a further comment.
Thank you. And Chair Cormack, we have no other speakers.
Thanks to the members of the public who provided comments during oral communications, and if a member of our staff could just share whatever information it was that Mr. Buchanan asked for, that would be helpful. All right, we'll move on to our first action item, which is an adjusted operating plan for the Junior Museum and Zoo. I believe we have a staff presentation, and then also as a courtesy, we're going to allow the Friends of the Junior Museum and Zoo to present to us today as well.
Good afternoon, council members. I want to make sure I'm sharing. Does that look okay?
Yes, it does. We can see
Okay.
the flamingos.
Thank you. I'm Kristen O'Kane. I'm the Director of Community Services, and with me today are 2 of our staff in the department, John Aiken, who oversees the Junior Museum and Zoo, and Lindsay Wong, who's CSD's budget analyst. So I'm going to go through a brief presentation, and first just wanted to introduce why we're here. If we go back to before we were really in the pandemic, we were here at Finance Committee and asking for a recommendation on a ticket fee and membership prices for the new Junior Museum and Zoo, which, as you know, will have a ticket fee for the first time in its history. It was previously a free facility. That was approved. And then in May, Council approved, because of after staff's recommendation, an $18 ticket fee and increased memberships. And the reason for this was at the time, a budget strategy to help bridge the gap that we had in our budget due to the pandemic. And since that time, we've really re-examined that $18 ticket fee and that membership range. and have questioned whether that range and that ticket fee was too high. We don't want to be in a situation where we are discouraging people to come because of the ticket price. And so we wanted to revisit that with the Finance Committee and show a broader range of options for ticketing and get some feedback and discussion, but also direction from you all as to how we should move forward when the new Junior Museum and Zoo opens. So we looked at a range of ticket fees from $10 to $18, and also different annual memberships. We have resident and non-resident memberships. As a reminder, we do not have a different resident rate for the daily entrance ticket. We do have a discounted ticket, which is $3. Previously, it was $2. We've since increased this to $3. And there, I will note that the free entrance that was in the staff report for age 2 and younger actually is now age 1 and younger. So in the staff report, we realized it still says 2 and younger, but it's actually 1 and younger. And the reason for that is we feel like there is quite a bit of activities for children over the age of 1 to do at the museum and the zoo, and so wanted to recognize that level of service that we'd be providing. We also looked at additional scenarios that include dynamic pricing models, which would increase ticket prices on peak visitation days. I'm not going to go into those scenarios as part of my presentation, but I do have that information readily available if any of the council members would like to go into more detail on that. So this is the big spreadsheet, not probably as big as Councilmember Philseth's, but big anyways. So what we are showing here is, first I want to go to the right and look at the assumptions when we put this together. So our traditional annual visitation was 185,000. We're assuming that stays the same. We did not adjust this based on the ticket price. So there is a possibility that at an $18 ticket price, fewer people come. And as the ticket price gets less, we get more visitors. We didn't make that adjustment in these scenarios just because it's such an unknown. So that's one thing to keep in mind. We also assumed 25% of our visitors would be carrying a membership card, and that 10% of our ticket sales would be discounted. Again, like I said earlier, the discounted ticket was increased to $3, and we're also increasing our class and camp prices by 15%. We've also added some additional rental revenue that we think we can obtain through corporate rentals when the zoo is not open to the public. So this first column where it says fiscal year 2018, we added that to show before we started construction, before the JMZ moved to Coverly, what did it look like from a financial standpoint and general fund impact? We didn't have a ticket price. We didn't have membership prices. We still brought in revenue from our classes, camps, and educational programs, and some birthday party rentals. And then we had higher expense. There is a footnote here on allocated charges. This doesn't include all of our allocated charges. It includes some, but so if the allocated charges are higher, that means the cost recovery would decrease slightly in this scenario. So you can see that traditionally we had about 30% cost recovery at the JMZ. So the shaded column where it says fiscal year 2022 current, that is what council approved for the fiscal year 21 budget. This though assumes that we'd be opening the JMZ in July and would have a full 12 months of operations. Whereas if we go into scenarios 2 through 5, these are opening in October, which we think is much more realistic with respect to getting the facility ready and prepared and staff trained and the animals all set to go. So we looked at different pricing scenarios of $18, $14, $12, and $10, and varying membership ranges that align with those ticketed prices. And as you can see, the cost recovery varies here from 85% at the $18 range down to 59% at the $10 range. Again, this is opening in October, so it's not a full year of operations. If you look at fiscal year 23, when we are in a full year of operations, we estimate these numbers to go slightly higher, around it's 78%, 71%, and I think it's like 62%. So slightly higher when we get into a full year of operations. And also to point out that this revenue is not just ticket and memberships. This includes our classes and camps, our facility rentals, and all of our programs as well. So our next steps are we're moving forward with continuing to plan for an October 2021 opening. And we're continuing to explore other opportunities for revenue. There are other programs that other zoos and museums do that could bring in some revenue, not a significant amount, but it could help in bringing some, like adopt an animal programs, private experiences, things like that. And that is all I have for my presentation. And I just got a note from my staff saying there's a correction that needs to be made. So for the cost recovery for the $14 scenario, never mind, now I'm confusing myself. So I'm going to, now, did you want to turn it over to the Friends of the JMZ to give their talk? Okay.
And then we'll go to the public, and then we'll come back to members of the committee.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing because I believe they have a presentation.
Okay, hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we
Okay,
can.
great. And can you see my presentation?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Hi there, my name is Lauren Angelo, and I'm the co-president of the Friends of the Palo Alto Junior Museum and Zoo. Thanks so much for giving us the opportunity to speak. The Friends were founded in 1990. We are currently an 18-member board, and our mission is to support and enhance the JMZ. We successfully ran a $25 million capital campaign to rebuild the JMZ. This was the largest gift to the city of Palo Alto in city history. Our organization is committed to reducing inequity in science education, and for over 20 years, we have funded our science outreach program, which pays the city of Palo Alto to provide science education to thousands of elementary school children in East Palo Alto and other underserved communities. Kristen went over the background on admission pricing, but one thing I wanted to note was while we were running the JMZ initiative, we did have an understanding that the city would reopen the new junior museum with a modest ticket price in the range of $6 to $8. And as Kristen said, last year it was $10 at Council Finance, and then City Council approved $18 in May of 2020. The Friends are strongly opposed to this $18 ticket price. We believe it would reduce the number of visitors, lower overall revenue, and undermine the goodwill of the community and all future fundraising. I want to stress that the city and the Friends have many shared goals. We are both invested in the long-term success of the JMZ. We both want to send a message to donors and to all Friends groups that the city of Palo Alto can have successful public-private partnerships. It is the city's long-term cost recovery plan to transition governance to the Friends, and we have agreed to consider this a few years after reopening. So reducing the operating deficit over time is in the best interest of whomever is running the JMZ. You can ensure the long-term health of the JMZ by giving it a strong start. Reopen with a ticket price of no more than $10 and maximize visitorship. You can increase the cost recovery over time. Our concern is that the city's current plan of $18 per person attempts to maximize short-term cost recovery, but ultimately sacrifices the long-term success and cost recovery of the JMZ. We believe that the admission price was set by working backwards. The city set a high cost recovery target last year and is trying to hit that target. Instead, the admission price should be based on market research, which would indicate $10 or less, certainly not $18. There are also a lot of flawed assumptions in the city's revenue model, and I appreciate that Kristen pointed out many of them actually. And in the next few slides, I'm going to go through them. The first is that the jump from free to fee will have no decrease on attendance. I believe this is a flawed assumption. The second is that attendance will be the same whether the ticket price is $10 or $18. The third is a misperception that the new JMZ increases the deficit to the city's general fund. And finally, that our competitors charge up to $18 and therefore we can too. So the first flawed assumption is that the jump from free to fee will not decrease attendance. And Kristen did talk about this, but that 185,000 visit per year figure is based on data sampling that was done in a single year several years ago when in the original facility when the museum was free. In fact, attendance will decrease when you jump the free to fee chasm. The second flawed assumption is that attendance will be the same regardless of whether the ticket price is $10 or $18. The reality is attendance will decrease as the ticket price increases. And if attendance decreases due to a high ticket price, it could be years before attendance levels recover. In the chart on this slide, I attempt to model what it might look like if attendance drops as the ticket price increases. So the gray line at the top is what's in the staff report, which inaccurately assumes, as Kristen pointed out, that there will be no impact on attendance as the ticket price increases. So as ticket price increases, so does revenue. But the bottom line is that we do not have the data to accurately model the impact of the admissions price on attendance. So we run the very real risk of decreasing cost recovery by pricing ourselves too high and reducing visitorship. And the blue line at the bottom of this chart illustrates that. If each $2 increase results in 15% fewer visits, your overall ticketing revenue will be lower at $18 per person than at $10 per person. The third flawed assumption is that the new JMZ increases the deficit to the city's general fund. And I see that Kristen added a further leftmost column, but in the staff report that we had, the model scenario one was the budget adopted by council in 2020, which established a baseline net general fund impact of $617,000. And really a more accurate baseline is the actual net general fund impact of the JMZ in years like 2018, when it was approximately $1.3 million. And so actually at $12, you would be decreasing that deficit. In fiscal year 22, which isn't even a full year of operations and a full year of ticket revenue. The fourth assumption is that our peer institutions charge $18 and we can too, when in fact our peers, $18 far exceeds the ticket price of nearby attractions. This is a chart that the Friends put together comparing some local children's museums and zoos. It has the price for children pre-pandemic, the annual attendance at these institutions, and the total square footage of each of them. They're ranked in order by lowest to highest. And as you can see, we were the cheapest when we were free and will be leapfrogging to being equivalent to the San Francisco Zoo, which is the most expensive of them, if we charge $18. And what I'd like to highlight is the JMZ has the smallest square footage of all of these institutions. Two of our peers report almost half the attendance that the city projects in its current model. This is important because their attendance figures are based on actual real numbers at a ticketed gate, whereas the city's numbers are based on sampling done in a year when it was free to get into the museum. Unlike all of our peers, the JMZ currently offers no food service and no cafe. So for these reasons, the dwell time at the JMZ is simply lower and people will not be willing to pay $18. It is really important that the JMZ attracts a broad audience. The middle income market is critical for cost recovery and it also reflects the Friends' accessibility values. So I want to stress, this is not only a question of equity. To hit the projected attendance figures, the city needs more than the very affluent to buy tickets. Only 20% of visits to the old facility were from Palo Alto residents, and an $18 admission fee will price out many former visitors to the JMZ. So here's a thought experiment. Will a family from San Jose choose to drive to Palo Alto and pay almost $80 for 2 or 3 hours of play at the JMZ? Or would they stay in San Jose and pay less for a full day at the Children's Discovery Museum, which is over 3 times the size of the JMZ, has a cafe, a theater, permanent and temporary exhibits, water play, 2 art studios, and much more. I also want to spend a moment talking about philanthropy in Palo Alto. Capital campaigns in Palo Alto rely on the community's philanthropy. The Palo Alto Library Foundation raised $4.5 million, and the Art Center Foundation raised $4 million in their capital campaigns. The libraries and the Art Center remain free and accessible to all. Donors would not have funded these projects or ours if they had known that their donations would increase inequity by turning free gems into state-of-the-art but fee-based facilities that are inaccessible to many families. Donors have told us that if the city reopens the JMZ at $18, they will deeply regret that they ever donated to the JMZ initiative. They will not donate to the JMZ in the future, and they will not fund future capital projects in Palo Alto. So I'd like to close with the recommendations of the Friends. Please do not attempt to maximize short-term cost recovery by relying on a model that has many false assumptions. Do instead reopen with a ticket price of at most $10. Don't underestimate what it is to jump the free to fee hurdle. Foothills Park jumped the free to fee hurdle with a $6 per vehicle fee, and $10 to $12 is what the JMZ's actual closest competitors charge. Instead, move toward long-term financial stability. Gather data once you have reopened with a ticketed gate, ramp up your other revenue streams like corporate events, and increase cost recovery over time. The city and the Friends are both invested in the JMZ's long-term success, and I hope that we can continue to work together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Angelo. Now we'll turn to members of the public who'd like to speak on this item. If the clerk could please assist them.
Yes, of course. And currently we have Ms. Rebecca Eisenberg. Ms. Eisenberg, you'll have 2 minutes to speak on this item. If you can unmute yourself, we will begin those minutes.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Lauren Angelo. Lauren Angelo's presentation was literally the best researched presentation I've seen at the City Council or any of its committees or commissions in the past 2 years. And you know I don't miss a meeting. So I imagine that you all will disregard it. The Junior Museum, I guess it's no longer surprising that this council and the city staff does not understand the interplay between price and purchase volume. Didn't you learn that in high school economics? If not, couldn't you have learned it on The Apprentice? It's legendary how ill-informed these reports can be. But you would know that this would be coming, this $18 a ticket for a public museum, a formerly public museum, or an almost public museum, if you spent some time reading classic and best regarded works of literature. In this case, I refer you to The Parable of the Sower series by award-winning luminary author Octavia Butler. She's Black and she's female, so it's possible that you never reached for these books, but I'm asking you to do so. Octavia Butler became a bit famous over the past years because she correctly predicted that someone with the exact profile of Donald Trump would be president. Here are a couple more things she predicted, and I kind of don't care if they're spoilers. One is the total privatization of education and culture. So only the rich have access to high quality schools and cultural opportunities. Another thing is the complete privatization of travel, no public transportation. Another thing, such a wide gap between rich and poor that the masses of poor have no political voice or chances. Read these books, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eisenberg. Our next speaker is Jeremy Ehrman. Jeremy, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I would really echo the presentation that the Friends of the Junior Museum and Zoo put out. It really was an excellent presentation with very, very clear details. And as a longtime community member of Palo Alto, I strongly oppose a higher fee. And as someone who's participated in many, many community organizations, ticketed, such as orchestras and theaters and all sorts of groups, an $18 fee is very, very high for this institution, especially considering, as it was said, it is much smaller than the other institutions that it's being compared to. I'm also very confused with this fee as it applies to children. Is this fee for both children and adults? There is a very low discount ticket, but I can't find anywhere that says what is a discount ticket. Almost all organizations have discounted tickets for children, so I'm very confused when you're suggesting $18 for a child of the age of 2 to go to the Junior Museum. I mean, this is just, frankly, crazy, because the overall money this would spend for a family of even 4 to go to this museum would be extraordinary. Even at the $10 fee, that's still $40 for a family of 4. So I don't understand why children's tickets are not steeply discounted or even just free. So I really urge you to think about that. I applaud the city for moving forward with the Junior Museum and Zoo, but I'm especially concerned by the fact that it's very heavily promoting the Junior Museum and Zoo over all the other programs. The description of community services right now starts off the Junior Museum and Zoo. When the budgets for other departments are being looked at, are you going to have the Friends of the Alto Children's Theater giving you a presentation? Are you going to have the staff of the Art Center and Children's Library telling you what they need and what they think? Because my experience is this is not the case. So I really urge you to listen to all the other departments, community services, and not just Junior Museum and Zoo, and to see what they tell you they actually need. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mara Wallace. Mara, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Thank you so much. I actually came to the meeting to talk about the Art Center, but now have become engaged in this topic. And I too want to echo the Friends of the Museum and Zoo, particularly as someone who contributed to that capital campaign that funded the renovation. It's true that I gave to that believing we were supporting a community service and resource that would remain free. I had no idea that we were going to start charging for that. So that is disappointing to me. On a more solutions-oriented note, I just am curious, and I clearly don't have the history here, so forgive me if this has been discussed, but I wonder about sliding fee scales. I wonder also what Mr. Ehrman was saying about, do you have different prices for different age visitors? I don't imagine the adults are as engaged with the actual exhibitions, et cetera. So I just hope that there can be a public-private solution to this. I understand recouping costs is important, but I do want to support the Friends of the Junior Museum and Zoo. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And Chair Cormack, we have no other speakers.
Thank you to the clerk. And now we come back to council members, and we'll begin with Councilmember Philstad.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I wanted to start with a couple of questions. And so Ms. O'Kane, I'm glad you brought this up because I was going to ask it. What allocated charges are not in? I mean, what's the amount of allocated charges that are not in the allocated charges? Because I'm looking at the Finance Committee presentation from a year ago, and it makes a note about that, and it says there would be another 500,000 or so in allocated charges that aren't part of the allocated charges, right? Is it about the same, or what is it?
It's less. So allocated charges are actually really hard to determine because they're spread out all over the place.
Of course.
So moving forward, the estimate we're using is 900,000. Previously, we think that what we have in this table is off by 50 to 100,000. So not that much different.
Okay, so 900,000 is most of us, because in the one a year ago, you had $500,000 in allocated charges, and then there was a hand wave. Maybe there's another 500,000. So you think the 900 is actually pretty close to the. Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. Okay. So next question, I couldn't figure out. What's the head count for the JMC? So if I look in the operating budget, proposed operating budget. If I can find it here. Looks like there's a 1, 3, 4, 8, 10.6. Looks like there's 11.6. If I look in the previous, it looks like the fiscal 20. It looks like there's about 16. Now, if I look at proposed for fiscal 22, it looks like about 23. So, but I'm not sure what that includes and doesn't include. So, how many people work at the JMZ?
Sure. So I'm going to share my screen because I have some slides that show this. I think. Am I allowed to share my screen? There we go. So this is the sort of current staffing prior to us opening in October.
Okay. So that's basically the yeah, that's right. That's the current that's the current before the added positions. How does that map to the 11.6 in the proposed operating budget?
So, well, this is what was approved. I'm not sure where the 11.6 comes from, frankly.
It is
but
on page 186 in the proposed operating budget.
Councilmember Phil Seth, on page 186 on the proposed operating budget is the org chart, which articulates full-time FTE. And if you notice on that table, it says at the very base of it, 2022 position totals, and there's 39.74 hourlies.
Yep.
There are hourly positions in there that have to do with the Junior Museum and Zoo. So when you're looking at...
So if I understand what you just said, the 11.6 on page 186 contributes to the 63.37, but not the 39.74.
That's correct.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Director Nazir.
No problem.
Okay, so then the operating plan for, or the previous version is 15.94, and the proposed operating plan adds another 7, which is how you get to 23.
It does, yes. So this was what council approved in the fiscal year 21 budget. None of these positions have been filled yet.
Yep.
But this is what ideally would be needed to
Okay.
operate the facility.
Okay. And then I have another question. Thank you. So that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have another question, which is part of the goal of the JMZ is to get AZA accreditation. And there's a certain amount of overhead and effort associated with that. So if we postpone AZA accreditation a couple of years, does that have an impact on the headcount needed?
I'm going to ask John Aiken to help answer that one.
Right, I can answer that. We are actually planning to apply for accreditation from both AZA for the zoo and from AAM, the American Alliance of Museums for the museum. And it's actually the museum position that is not in that budget, but would need to be to actually be successful in that. We need someone to manage the collections. It's a part-time collections manager. The zoo, as long as we're taking care of the animals appropriately, we are fine. AZA will come out and make their own decision when they do an inspection after we've operated for a year and we apply. And then they will tell us whether or not they believe we have enough staff. I believe there's enough staff in the plan.
So to get the museum accreditation, you have to add a person to this plan.
One part-time person.
Okay. You know, I hear by the grapevine that Happy Hollow Zoo has a full-time person doing nothing but managing paperwork for AZA accreditation.
Well, managing collections is a lot of work. Usually it's their collection manager that does that, but it's managing all of the record keeping for the animal collection.
Uh-huh. And you think that's built into the plan here?
Yes, because we have an assistant curator that we are recruiting for now that would take some weight off of Rob Steele, who does that and all of our permitting and all of the supervision And so that's where that comes from. But it's what we need to do to take care of the animals appropriately and have the records to prove it.
Okay. So it seems to me that, so we have this issue here. So first of all, if I can summarize where I think we find ourselves here is that, we have an operating plan, okay? And it assumes we're going to get this many people at $18 ticket price and this many memberships and so forth. And we got this much expenses and we got this many activities and so forth, right? And so the friends have raised and we've spent $25 million to build the place. We're ready to open. And now here it is, right before we open, we're saying, oh, wait a second, the numbers in the operating plan don't add up. Okay, right, which is essentially what we're saying, right? We're saying, oh yeah, we $18, we can't meet our goals with $18. Yeah, I think we have sort of two issues. One is, we need a new operating. If that's in fact the case, we need a new operating plan. And I don't know that we're going to come up with one today, right? So it's not a question. I mean, I think it's more deeper than, should the ticket price be $18 or $17 or $13 or $5, right? I mean, we need a plan where the numbers add up. So because if we change the ticket price, it's going to need a lot more money, right? And that's going to be true of all the things we're doing going forward. And I think one of the public speakers sort of alluded to this. He was very diplomatic about it. He said, if you spend more money on the JMZ, we're going to have to take more money away from something else, right? And so how that all fits together is kind of the process that we're going to go through in the next several weeks. But it sounds to me like if in fact the assertion of the Friends is correct, we need a new operating plan for the zoo. The second thing I'm going to observe is that, it seems to me, I mean, we're the finance committee, we're the city council, we're sort of like the board of directors here, right? It seems to me that, who owns the operating plan? It seems to me like the city owns the operating plan, but it seems like the Friends are doing the marketing plan, okay? And so if those two things are, if those two things aren't in lockstep, then it's a sort of a recipe for finding where we are. And I know there's been sort of discussions about governance and how we run the zoo and who's responsible for what and how that changes over time and so forth. But I think, when we got an operating plan and we got a marketing plan and they're not connected to each other, right? Or only loosely, right? So I think we need to solve that problem in the long term. Okay. But okay, I'll pipe down. I think we need to and let other people talk and ask questions. I think basically what we're saying is the numbers don't add up in our operating plan. What are we going to do? Right. So I think at least that's how it seems to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Phil Seth. Vice Mayor Burt.
Sure. So I want to thank the Friends for providing a couple of different graphs that essentially attempt to show possibilities of elasticity of demand. I'm kind of baffled that the tables that the city has provided basically assume that there is no elasticity, that there's no variability of demand depending on pricing, and that's just not the way it goes. We don't know precisely what that is, but that's not a basis to not model it. We in fact have modeled something, and it's a model that doesn't make sense. It runs up against basic economics that in most circumstances, and like this, demand is going to be elastic. You charge more, you'll have fewer attendees. It may be nominally different. If it's a nominally different price increase, but if it's significant, it probably is significant. I think $18, especially when you compare it to the competition, is quite high, and would result in all likelihood in lower revenue to the city rather than higher revenue, or at best something approaching a neutral impact. So we really would have benefited greatly by being shown several different scenarios with an understanding that nobody has a crystal ball on this, on exactly how that's going to map out. We can have points of reference with kind of competition in the area, and we have a table at the back that shows, well, they're on, the tables aren't labeled, but it's packet page 6 and shows the pricing at different other museums and zoos that are generally larger than ours. This is going to be exceptional quality, and but a fairly small institution. So I would also add that we just saw this elasticity of demand manifested in the pricing for Foothills Park. We were overrun and having to close the park because it was over capacity when we had opened it up to the public and had no fee. And we put in place kind of a modest fee, and the feedback we've gotten is it's pretty close to a sweet spot. It is resulting in near capacity on weekends, but not for the most part over capacity. And so that's a good reference point. That was only $6. Comparing an open space preserve to this museum and zoo is not apples to apples. So, but it's just illustrative of what we're likely to encounter here. I did want to, on the operating model side, I wanted to understand more about the feasibility of relying on docents for much of the services. I don't know to what extent that's built into the model and to what extent it could. I know that we run into certain insurance issues, but I also know that going back 20 years before it went through its last remodel, which was not anywhere near the scale of this, it was very reliant on docents for serving and staffing, basically. So can staff talk about the role of volunteers and docents in this?
Go ahead, John. And you're on mute.
I need to unmute myself. Yes, we have volunteers built into every department in the new model. The reality with volunteers, particularly when you're ramping up and you're starting up, is that they cannot replace what a staff person does. Eventually, they let you build enough flexibility into the system that staff can be doing other things. And so we are planning on having a robust docent and volunteer program.
So tell me more about how robust and when.
Well, starting immediately when we open and can have people in the building. Right now, because of COVID, we've had to scale back our volunteer program just based on social distancing and close tasks and things like that. But as soon as the pandemic will allow, we want to ramp our volunteer program up as quickly as possible. And we believe that because it's new and shiny and fun, that the community will respond and we'll be able to grow those volunteers relatively quickly. But it takes time to then rely on them and know that their schedules are going to last.
So do we have a projection when we say it takes time? I appreciate that. As we're looking at our cost models and how much we really have to have by pension full-time city staff versus a real gem that yeah, I agree with you. I think that we're going to have a lot of community members, retirees and moms and dads and otherwise, who are going to actually really enjoy volunteering at this center, because it's just going to be a cool place to be, and all the related aspects of it. So do we have a plan for to what degree we add those volunteers and how much they allow us to, over time, reduce full-time city staffing?
We have a plan. That plan is contingent on the number of staff people that we have to manage and train those volunteers. And so we have not released the plan until we settle the number of people that we are opening with. They will never completely replace staff because you have to manage volunteers. It's actually quite a lot of work, but you get a great deal from them. You can do more with them, but you can't replace staff with them.
I understand that. Although there is a model of eventually whether long-term we may be able to have this as a city-supported nonprofit where we have a hybrid. And in that case, they would have their own staffing along with their own set of volunteers. Okay, so I guess you're saying you haven't released that plan. We're the finance committee. We're trying to figure out where we're headed on our costs, and between not having any projections on variability of demand based on pricing, not having projections on to what degree we are anticipating we will gravitate toward more volunteers and fewer full-time staff. It kind of puts us at a disadvantage as the committee that's supposed to be scrutinizing the finances. We can't just be told, well, you know, we can't share that with you. We're the finance committee. We need to have this information shared with us.
Okay, Vice Mayor, I'm just going to interrupt for a moment. Are you wrapping up? Clearly, we're going to need another round, or do you just have one more thing to add on this round? Happy to let you go over.
Whether it's this round or next round.
Okay, well then. Okay, so your time is up, and I'll go ahead and jump in. Ms. Nose, did you have something you wanted to add?
That would be great, thank you. Just to let the Finance Committee know and add a little color to the situation that's going on. And I'm sure we'll hear this as we
No,
go through
wait, this isn't my time. This is Ms. Nose's time.
Oh.
I'll get back to the timer in a second. Go ahead.
That's awesome.
No.
Thank you, Josh. So the like I said, one of the things that I think we will hear and see and recognize as we move through this, and I know the committee and the council has heard this from us many times before, but right now I think, frankly, in CSD we're dealing with a capacity issue. They typically have 2 analysts that are working on projects like this, plus some additional administrative staff that are working on these, and they're down to 1. And so trying to run and the whole department and all the analytical work associated with that, plus going through this budget season, absolutely hear the Vice Mayor and the committee on more data and modeling would be great. If that's something that is the will of this committee, could be a recommendation to council to further invest in something like this, because there are ways that we can invest and get that assistance. But I do think that's where we're at right now on this, is we, with our hiring freeze, have purposefully not hired these vacant positions. And that's one of the things you're seeing in terms of staff's capacity to do all of this in the timeframe necessary for the 2022 budget.
Thanks. I guess it's a good thing that Councilmember Phil South has his worksheet fired up. I just want to say to my colleagues that it's a practice here today with the 5-minute timer, but when we do get to budget next week, I'm going to adhere to it more closely because we just will not have the time to go through each of the items in as much depth as I know some of us would like to. So let me start by saying what I like, you know, what's wonderful. And what's wonderful is we have this fantastic facility. I had the opportunity to have a tour last week. Thank you so much, Mr. Aiken. Really, it's, you know, it's going to be a wonderful place once it's filled with kids. I had to climb up the tree by myself, so that was a little bit less fun than doing it with kids. And I want to acknowledge the extraordinary generosity of the donors to the Friends of the Junior Museum and Zoo. This really has I hesitate to say set a new bar. I think it's more like a pole vault. We've sort of vaulted over all of the prior records. And And I just want to acknowledge it's such a beautiful day for what's frankly kind of a miserable discussion. The contrast is kind of inescapable. So I just wanted to start with what looks good. Then I do have a question about the October opening. Could staff chat with us about whether that was chosen based on when the animals and the exhibits are going to be ready, if that was chosen based on when we think we're going to be nearer herd immunity, at least in this area? What are our thoughts about October? Because that factors into our decision here.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Cormack. It's really a combination of various factors. One is getting to a place where we have all or most of the animals that we would want at the zoo, getting them ready for visitors to enjoy, and also getting the right staff that we need, getting everything finalized. And, you know, obviously summer and holidays are the best time to open a new facility just because that's when people are visiting them. But we weighed that with, you know, just thinking, when will we actually be ready to open the zoo?
Okay. And I understand you're waiting for a particular meerkat. So held up in customs, not the meerkat, just the paperwork. All right. So I want to thank Councilmember Philseth for, you know, nailing it as usual, which is we have a disconnect between our operating plan and our marketing plan. And, you know, I was just reviewing actually some of the auditor stuff earlier today. And I think this is one of the areas that's been, we've had a lot of flexibility throughout the community in terms of our public-private partnerships. And this is just a really bad time where people's expectations for what this was going to be like are running, you know, smack into a multi-million-dollar deficit problem. I'm cognizant of the comment from a member of the public that we have to look at this in the context of all of the changes that are going to have to be made. Let's see. Oh, I have 2 minutes left. So exciting. That's because I made Ms. Nose speak on her own time. Let me see if I have any other questions. I guess the only other thing, it's just we're spending a little bit of time on history. I want to be sure everyone's on the same page about the cost recovery we used to have. Expectations when this was begun. I just want to verify that everyone agrees that what the staff report says is cost recovery was at 50%. Was that was when? Was that a proposal? I'm looking on page 4, packet page 7.
And let me take a look. Councilmember.
Adjusted operating model presented to council. Oh, that must have been last year. Okay, so that moved it from 50 to 85. Okay. I wonder, Ms. O'Kane, if you could just put up that table that had the 6 columns that started with FY 2018. You know, I think it's fair to say that the city certainly was not in a financial position to agree to double the expenses and carry that. And we definitely did not have $25 million available in our capital infrastructure plan, as anyone who watched last night knows. So it's interesting to look at these combinations and see where we were. I guess another question for Ms. Nose perhaps is, you know, on average, what is the percent we've reduced CSD over the past 2 years, right? If you look at that 1.3, all of our departments have taken cuts in the last year and then are proposed for this year. So maybe general fund percentage. And do you have something like that that would help us think about what we used to pay and then what other departments are receiving this year?
Probably. So if you continue on around, I'll find that.
Okay, and really just, you know, doesn't have to be super specific. Okay, let's see. We've lost, who wants, Councilmember Filsa, should we come back to you? Go through again, same order?
Sure, I didn't have a lot more to add at this point. I think, you know, in terms of steps going forward. This seems like the kind of thing that something ought to go in the parking lot, just sort of getting ahead of ourselves on the budget process here. But, you know, I mean, basically looking at this chart is, you know, there's $1 million a year gap here. And so it may be that, I mean, I don't know how we're going to fill that $1 million between $617,000 and $1.531 million. But maybe that $1 million a year ought to go in the parking lot. I mean, because the world's not going to end if we don't set a ticket price and a staff level today, right? So, I mean, we got a little bit of time. And
Okay.
JMZ will, I mean, and to your point earlier, yeah, I mean, the place looks great. I mean, I think people are really going to like it, right? We got to make the math work, right? So.
Okay, thanks. Vice Mayor Burt, back to you.
Well, I think there is merit to us putting this in what, for maybe members of the public don't realize, in the budget process, we put some things in a parking lot at the beginning of the process to say, okay, here's maybe where we're headed. And as we come back together and we look at the budgetary impacts in aggregate, how do we sort out the remainder of the unresolved issues with whatever resources we have remaining, or whatever resourcefulness we can come up with. So I think that this may be correct. I would say that I think that charging $18 for a general ticket is too high and is probably counterproductive in terms of resolving any of the general fund impacts, and that I think that the modeling here is not correct, and I'd like to have staff come back with some revisions when we do revisit this. And I don't think this is not a highly complicated analysis to come up with some other scenarios that show variability in the attendance based on different pricing. I also want to know more about where we're headed. When we make a budget decision, it's one thing for us to figure out that we got an opening year for a real gem of the community that is going to be this great because we had tremendous contributions from donors for the capital program. And do we need to figure out a way to bridge a gap this year and see that in the future we're maybe moving toward reducing operating costs through a higher percentage of the labor being from volunteers and any other means to do so. So I'd say those are the things I'd want to see when we try to resolve this at the end of the budget process.
Ms. Nose, did you want to jump in?
I think I found the numbers. Of course, with any data, there are multiple ways to slice it. If you were to look at the reductions that we've taken in the Community Services Department last year and this year, we're looking at about $4.5 million net. That's revenues and expenses, so the combined impact of those. And within that, obviously, is this price change for the JMZ fee. If we're looking at just kind of their budget overall year to year, when we're looking pre-COVID versus where we are today, we're looking at about an 8.5% decline. And for context, CSD's budget is about $28 million, $29 million, depending on the year.
Okay.
So
8%, very helpful, thank you. Okay, in the interest of time, since we have 2 more items after this, and one of them is quite large, why don't I go ahead and get a motion on the table and see if we can move forward. First, let me just check with staff on timing though. Is there some rush to getting this to council, or can we, tentatively approve this and then put some amount in the parking lot and work through that through the budget process?
Well, I guess the you know, if we're planning on and going forward with an October opening, and we need to get all of our processes in line. So for example, we intend to do like online ticketing sales and things like that. So, you know, we do need enough time in advance to get everything logistically set up before we open in October. And John, I don't know if you have more information on how long that would take. Like if we say opened October 1st, what would be the final date that we would need?
Yeah, we're looking at the first week in October. So October, right in the beginning of it, we're already behind the 8 ball from a marketing standpoint. Ideally, you want a 6-month ramp up period of marketing where you actually are getting your messaging out to the public so that they anticipate the opening and they come, because that opening is really important to long-term success in terms of attendance. And so that's really the only thing is setting up, getting all those systems in place, things under contract. But I think right now we are talking about the 1st of July before any of those funds would be released anyway. So I think it has to be within the new fiscal year. We can't have any of that released at this point, as I understand it, in the process.
Okay, but we are going to have a ticket price, so there's no reason you can't be putting the systems in place now and changing them if the number changes, correct?
Yes, except that our budget was reduced this year and pulled out those funds that were available to ramp up those marketing costs. And so we can't really start until we have the new budget approved and the marketing costs approved.
But I think I understand what you're saying, council member, is can we get the behind the scenes processes in place and then just adjust the price? Yes, we could do that.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, we don't have $900,000 available today. We can't agree to scenario 5. That's not within our purview. So I'm going to suggest then that we, and sorry, I'm not sure I got an answer to whether or not this has to be sent to council before we go through the budget or if it can be sent during.
I'll take a stab at that, although Director O'Kane, correct me if I am off on timing. I think this can go concurrent with the budget process, but I believe that if we were to establish a fee after July 1, so subsequent to the budget process, that would cause timing issues in terms of getting everything up, ready for the October timeframe. I will also say staff's capacity to do some, multi-tenant detailed analysis in the next reminder budget process is like the next 14 days. Over the next 14 days, I think just want to set expectations on how complex that kind of expectation is for additional information between now and when the committee will be reviewing the budget process.
Okay. So let me try a tentative motion. I suggest that the Finance Committee tentatively approve the staff recommendation that we put $914,000 in the future parking lot for us to consider throughout the budget process. I'm just going to take a moment to remind everyone that based on last night's presentation, the total available to work with for all of the, to restore any of the proposed cuts is about $3 million. And that staff perform some, I'm going to use the word simple for lack of a better word, scenario analysis and, incorporating different sensitivities. So I'm not looking to do multivariate analysis, just, give us a few of the ranges, just if we could see sort of, it might just help us see if there's a sweet spot, if we can see the 10%, the 15%. Stop there, see if there's a second.
I'm inclined to second, but I want to understand exactly what the motion is.
The motion is we're going to go ahead and make the staff recommendation, and we're going to use during the budget process the opportunity to understand a little bit more about the attendance and ticket price interaction. And we're going to put, yeah.
So the staff recommendation I'm reading is the Finance Committee review and recommend to City Council an adjusted operating plan for the JMC.
So the budget, the budget one. Now we've lost that, but the actual approval for the budget. The one that's based in the budget with the 18.
Which budget? With the $18 ticket price?
Yes, that's
Okay.
what we have available, and we
Right.
don't have any funds to spend today that I'm aware of.
All right, I agree with that, and I'll second that.
Okay, thanks. I don't see it written up. Does the clerk and our staff understand what the, here we go. Tentatively approved staff, should we say budget recommendation? Is that more helpful?
Staff operating plan recommendation
Operating plan.
is actually the language in the staff.
Thank you. Using the budget process to better understand the interaction between the attendance and ticket price. I'll pause.
And expenses.
The interactions, yes, interactions between attendance, ticket price, and expenses.
Yep. I think that's important.
So very close. To better understand the interactions among attendance, ticket price, and expenses.
Ticket price.
Yeah, ticket price.
There we go.
And expenses.
And expenses.
We don't need two sets of expenses. And then let's say, and that we move, not approve, that we move $914,000 to the parking lot.
Yep.
And that we'll consider that at the end of the day on the 12th. I'm sure there'll be a few other things there. And direct staff. Sorry, I'm just writing that down. And direct staff to perform a simple scenario analysis. All right, let me just pause there and see if there's something missing for staff or confusing or problematic.
If I could ask, Chair?
Yes.
A couple of questions. So when it says tentatively approve this operating plan recommendation, that's referring to the operating plan that was approved for the current fiscal year already by council?
Aren't you asking us for the 2022 one?
That's correct. Director O'Kane, I think, and maybe we can clarify this in the motion, Chair Cormack, to tentatively approve the current FY 2022 operating plan, assuming an $18 charge.
Fine.
Tentatively approve this operating, assuming using the budget process, which will be a move. Okay, and then that we move $914,000 to the parking lot in consideration of a lower ticket price.
Yes.
Okay, is that helpful, Director O'Kane?
It is, thank you. And I guess the next one is, I just want to be sort of clear on the simple scenario analysis.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I'm just going to, a little public service announcement. This is not our normal time. So people who have kids or dogs or something going on, everybody can just be flexible. I understand we don't have somebody who's going to go do like, you know, a database analysis, and we're not going to hire a consultant to go see if we can find something. But I think a little bit of time using the information that the Friends presented and the table that you already have, you could give us a few options. You know, if the sensitivity was 10% or 25% on the ticket prices, how would that change attendance and how would that flow down? That's what I'm imagining. Councilmember Philseth, are you in the same boat?
Works for me.
Okay.
Could I know we have some other items. Could I just quickly ask John Aiken to talk about the consultant work that has already been done regarding ticket pricing and attendance?
Sure.
Sorry, John.
Yes, certainly. We've done work with a couple of consultants, and they've made recommendations. The challenge is we've done this over time for various ticket prices and various operating models actually quite early in the process. And so what we have done is taken some of their general assumptions and their recommendations about price structure, but not their recommendations are looking at different numbers. So it's not a one-to-one correlation. And so we've been interpolating them a little bit. We did prepare a $15% sensitivity to attendance based on ticket price, but we're concerned that it wasn't defendable at 15%. But I think your approach of going from say 10 to 20%, just put a range in there because we're probably not going to get it right, is a great way to do it. And we can easily do that.
Okay, great. All right, moving on. Any last questions, comments?
I'll speak to my second.
Oh, please go right ahead.
You know, I think we're all looking at this and, you know, here it is 2 weeks before the nationwide launch and the product manager's coming back saying, oh, by the way, revenue projections are all wrong. Right. And so we're scrambling a bit. But it should be really clear. I mean, we got to keep, I think the right thing today is to keep the $18 ticket price for the moment, because the plan of record is the plan of record until there's a new plan of record. And there's not a new plan of record yet, but presumably there will be one by the time we get to the end of the budget process.
Thanks. Vice Mayor Burt, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah. So I think this is not the right approach to approve an $18 ticket price and then review it later. I won't support a motion that includes that in there. The premise of this is that that scenario is that there is no elasticity in demand from the higher price. And I just can't support that premise, and I can't support that $18 is an appropriate amount to charge. So I get two problems with this. I think this is not a good motion to just plow forward on that basis, and then it's kind of incongruous to put that, to accept that and put that in the motion, but then put $900,000 in the parking lot. If we don't think that we're comfortable with that price at this time, then we shouldn't set the price in the motion. We should place that issue in the parking lot.
All right, let's go ahead and vote. Vice Mayor Burt?
No.
I'll vote yes, and Councilmember Filseth.
Yes.
That passes on a 2-to-1 motion. Let me see how we're doing on time. Let's go ahead and move through the next item, and then we'll take a 5-minute break after item 2 and before item 3. Does staff have a presentation on the Stanford University Medical Fund?
Yes, hi, Christine Peros, Assistant Director of Administrative Services. Let me try to share screen.
Christine, I can do it for you.
Oh, cool, even better, thank you. Okay, great. Next slide, please. So this is the overview of the staff report. City Council requested and referred a item to review the Stanford University Medical Center Fund at its January 30th retreat. So the main goal of presenting this information is to better equip the Finance Committee with information of the Stanford University SUMC fund and its uses, and also what the planned expenses are in that you will be reviewing in the May 11th meeting. Next slide. This table can be found on page 3 of the staff report. Total planned commitments for this fund In the 5-year capital plan is about 13 million. And we've also have planned commitments of 2.4 million in the 2021 budget. This leaves us with about $1.5 million of funds not committed. As you can see on the chart, the majority of those funds are in the community health and safety expenditure category and the expansion cost mitigation category. Next slide. Thank you. We also wanted to give the Finance Committee the prior year expenditures out of this fund, what we've invested in capital through 2020. Majority of these funds were invested in bicycle and pedestrian plan improvements, project safety net and track monitoring, and transfer to housing funds. Oh, and the new public safety building, of course, about a little bit less than 5 million. This table shows the array of planned commitments upcoming for the various buckets of the SUMC fund. They're organized by capital project and also along the top outline the expenditure categories. So I'll just give you guys a moment to look at that. Most of it is climate change bike pedestrian plan. Oh, and finally, recommendations, speeding through. We recommend that the Finance Committee accept the SUMC report of current and planned commitments in preparation for the 2020 budget. This is us opening up for questions and comments from the Finance Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carras. And now we'll go to members of the public. If there's anyone who'd like to speak to us about the Stanford University Medical Fund, if the clerk could please assist them to share their comments.
Yes, of course. We have Ms. Rebecca Eisenberg. Ms. Eisenberg, if you can unmute yourself, you will have 2 minutes for public comment.
Great, thank you. So looky here, $2.4 million that's not allocated. What do you know? You could spend this on climate change and sustainability communities. That could be things like getting cars off the road, as the Sierra Club tells you need to do, by having some transit options, infrastructure, and affordable housing. Look, you could actually spend some money on that. Maybe with that 0.8 million that you plan to spend, why don't you hire someone who can then work on applying for some money from the state? So it could be a one-time charge, even a consultant. I have some actually that I can refer to you, not me. So you don't think I'm doing self-interest, you never know with y'all. There is money that needs to be spent. And if this is unallocated money, why is it unallocated? So I don't accept this presentation. Maybe I heard wrong or am reading wrong, in which case I'd be happy to have a clarification. But I hadn't heard wrong with the whole thing about pricing and attendance. So I wonder if I am with this too. Anyway, thank you for considering, and let's spend money on our community. Cutting costs leads to death in the business world. We don't want that in the private world either. That's all. I mean, in the public world either. Thank you so much. That's all.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Danelle Dumas. Danelle, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment. Danelle, if you can unmute yourself. All right, we'll go to the next speaker for now. Our next speaker is Rich Green. Rich, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment. If you can unmute yourself, we'll begin the time.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Rich Green. I'm the president of the Palo Alto Museum. And we appreciate the difficult task you have in considering the budget issues this committee and the city council as a whole have to weigh. We also want to state our appreciation of city support for the federal grant recently submitted for the Roth Building and the Palo Alto Museum. However, like any grant, we cannot count on it until a determination is made, and the funding would not be made available until 2023. I'm here today to speak briefly about the Stanford Development Funds for the rehabilitation of the Roth Building. Restoring the historic Roth Building that is part of the city's infrastructure would be the completion of the SOFA 1 development goals. The rehabilitation of the building is a one-time expenditure, and council last year voted to focus on shovel-ready projects, which the Roth project is. The museum has permits in hand, and Tim Stitt of Vance Brown Construction, the museum's contractor, wrote to you all recently indicating this would be an advantageous time to start the project. We respectfully ask that you consider funding the Rehabilitation Gap using Stanford development fees as part of completing the project. The funding gap is calculated at between 3.7 and 4.1 million. Together with impact fees, we believe we can get there without touching general fund dollars. We are here to partner with the city in bringing multiple benefits to the community, such as a permanent home to the city-owned archives, which are an extension of the Palo Alto City Library system, a public restroom for Heritage Park, filling education gaps for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders, public meeting spaces and events venue, and many other benefits that are just too long to list here. There is precedent for city investment in partnerships with many other community projects in the past, such as the Junior Museum and Zoo, Avenidas, and the Arts Center. We look forward to finding ways to move together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dennis Burns. Dennis, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes on the timer. Dennis, we don't seem to hear you. Are you there? Hello, Dennis. We can't seem to hear you as of now. It seems that your mic may be broken. But for now, we have another speaker as well, Mary Gloner. We'll skip to her. Mary Gloner, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes on the timer for public comment.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm pitch hitting for former Chief Dennis Burns, so I'm going to be sharing his talking points. So first and foremost, thank you, Chairperson Cormack, Vice Mayor Burt, and Councilmember Phillips for their time. Chief Burns serves on the Project Safety Net's Board of Directors. We are a 12-member board, which includes Kristen O'Kane, representing the city of Palo Alto as ex officio non-voting member. Present today include also Dr. Tamara Chavez, Patty DeMello Pine, Rob George, and myself as CEO. As you know, Chief Burns is a retired Palo Alto Chief of Police and currently works with Life Moves. The board tasked Dr. Chavez, who's the Director of Mental Health at Family and Children's Services at Division of Caminar, and former Chief Burns, to review the Stanford University Medical Center Development Agreement and identify opportunities to assist the City Council with dispersing the agreement funds to advance community health. 10 years ago, $4 million was carved out by Lucille Packard Children's Health and Stanford Healthcare for community health and safety in response to the first cluster of youth suicide, which Chief Burns personally experienced firsthand. Of this amount, $2 million was dedicated to Project Safety Net, with a overwhelming majority allocated to railway safety and means restriction efforts. One proposal for council's consideration is to establish a community endowment that invests in youth mental health activities, which can include intergenerational, family, worksite, creative arts, and other programs. A long-term investment strategy is especially important as we address the repercussions of COVID-19 and racial health disparities on the welfare of young people. This role, PSN is available to facilitate a community-centered process leveraging PSN Partners Council, partner organizations in the community this role is consistent with the past support that we've given the city of Palo Alto. In response to the community mobile response, Alcove Youth Mental Health Centers, and PERT. Thank you for your time, and we hope to further explore this proposal with you.
Thank you. And Chair Cormack, we have no other speakers.
Thank you so much to the members of the public who spoke to us, and we'll now return to council committee. Sorry. Do committee members have comments or questions on this report? Not seeing any hands.
I'll go ahead.
Vice Mayor.
So I wanted to see a little more, or have a little more explanation. I'm just pulling it up, sorry, on my screen. On the, I guess it's on slide 3, we have the non-committed funds. And then we the preceding column is the plan commitments for the next 5 years. So the intermodal transit, that project, is that in potential bus extension into the transit center from El Camino, or is that something else?
Let me look at that specifically. I actually see Ms. Peras looking in the budget book right now.
Okay.
Looks like that was a prior expense, if I'm reading that correctly.
Some is prior and some is current. So
Gotcha.
2021, there's 0.7 and 0.5 million committed in 2022 through 2026. And I just got confirmation that, yes, you are correct, Vice Mayor, from Mr. Kami.
Yeah, because the staff report says it's to be expanded on the Quarry Road improvement and transit center access in FY24. So that's expecting that we would go forward with that additional access. Huh?
Yes, and that project is outlined. That project is outlined in the proposed capital budget.
Okay, and then I didn't appreciate that we had $1 million of our grade separation funding for FY21 and 22 from this, what's the category of expansion cost mitigation. Are those dollars that have already been spent? It says 21 and 22. I'm not familiar with that. We've been getting, I thought our dollars for that project were coming from Measure B dollars, the not the grade separation construction dollars per se, but the other discretionary dollars from Measure B.
You are correct, Vice Mayor, that in large part the funding for grade separation is coming from the Measure B funds. However, we have also tapped things like SUMC to ensure full funding for the current project. So I also believe that Mr. Kami is joining us, so I don't want to put him on the spot, but he could probably also add additional color.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm here. I just joined as a panelist, but I'm not sure what the what question I just missed. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Philip. So we have a category of expansion cost mitigation, and it lists $1 million toward the grade separation project for FY21 and 22. And I was saying that I thought that project had been getting funded through Measure B, but I see that we have this $1 million, and so I want to know more about that. And is that money already spent, or what we're expecting to spend in the next year, or where do we stand on that?
So while he's looking, I can say the 2021 funds have been spent. The 2022 funds are part of the obviously 2022 proposed capital improvement budget.
Yeah, but it says $1 million for 21 and 22. So we've already spent some of these dollars on.
Correct. So if you look on slide 3 that we have shared here, under
Yep.
plan commitments for 2021, you can see expansion cost mitigation is 0.7.
Okay.
So 0.5 of that is for grade separation, and then 0.2, or actually it's 0.15 is for that University Avenue design work that was approved as part of the Community and Economic Recovery Plan.
Okay.
So I think what you probably want to focus on is the 0.5 for grade separation for 2022 through 2026.
And the History Museum folks had proposed that certain of these funds might be candidates for their project. I don't know whether through the chair, if I can ask Mr. Green to clarify what they're proposing or requesting.
Certainly.
He's still there? Let's see, is he still on the call?
I believe so.
He is. I'm sure the clerk is just going to take a moment to unmute him. If staff has an answer, staff can provide that as well.
I don't see his name here.
It's up in the participant list with his hand
Oh, there
up.
it goes. Okay, great.
All right, I believe I have enabled him. So Mr. Green?
Hello, I'm here.
Were you able to hear the question?
Could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, the History Museum was seeking consideration for some of the SUMC funds for the museum. Which buckets were you making that request from?
We don't see an exact match to the stated buckets. Here, I'm opening up the report right now. We could possibly be under the bucket of community health and safety, because of course any community history museum is essential to the mental health and well-being of the community. And we feel that the community resources provided by the museum and the Roth Building would be an invaluable resource to people in the community who are looking for refuge in some sense of perspective on what's going on in their lives, because they need to learn where we came from. So that's the essential role of a history museum in the community.
Okay, great, thank you. And
Okay,
so,
Vice Mayor, your time has expired on this round.
all right.
All right, Councilmember Filsath.
I actually think it looks pretty cut and dried. Thanks.
Okay, I'll just pop in and say I appreciate this. I remember when we spent some time digging into this a couple years ago. Let me just test my understanding. Excuse me, on page 3, this is staff returning. I think you're hoping to come last fall, and now you're coming now. That's fine. It's good timing with the budget. I have some interest in making some recommendations about some of the uncommitted funds today, that we could perhaps have this on the list of things that the full council could consider on the 17th. So I guess if I look at these categories, certainly community health and safety, I think cognizant of the difficulties we're going to face next week, and the desire by so many members of the community to protect things that are important to them. So I'm certainly going to be open to the idea of us allocating half of the community health and safety, I guess, to the parking lot for us to consider restoring some of the funds, understanding that they, excuse me, should be used on a one-time basis. I also think we should contemplate looking at the climate change part. I know our SCAP work is not entirely funded, and so I think we should contemplate, go ahead and allocating that, not necessarily in this fiscal year, but over time. So those are thoughts that I have on this topic. And back to you, Vice Mayor.
So I think you touched on the remainder where I wanted to go, which is, does staff have any plans that are tentatively identified for those non-committed funds?
I think there are a number of initiatives that have been discussed, outlined, or members of the community that have raised their hands for use of these funds. And ultimately, given where the council is at and the priorities associated with where we're at financially, as well as the fact that these are one-time funds, I think all of those things are principles and values to consider in terms of how we allocate these. They are not obviously dedicated towards anything at this time, but obviously there is a vast array of desires on how to allocate them. I'm sure that we'll spend them far exceeding what's available.
So if I understand that correctly, were you saying basically that you know that there are prospective demands, none that you have really tentatively set aside these funds for? Is that correct?
No, because these are at council's discretion on how to allocate them. So staff have not allocated.
But the staff goes through its own kind of budgeting process and anticipations. I know we have the ultimate decision, but my question was really whether staff has had any tentative determinations on how you are expecting to use these funds.
Sure. I think and periodically staff do allocate these funds as appropriate as we move through processes. So a great example of that is the Community and Economic Recovery Plan and the recent tapping of this. So I wouldn't say we've outlined everything that we have on our plates in terms of allocating them. Of course, I could ask every director in the city and they would say, here's how I think you should spend those. So barring doing that exercise, especially when they're all going through budget reductions, we've just been judicious as one-time projects come up to allocate them for those initiatives and work with the council on those priorities so that they go towards the council's current priorities.
Okay, great, thanks. So I will move the staff recommendation basically to accept the staff report.
Second.
Vice Mayor, would you like to speak to your motion?
No need.
Councilmember Filsath.
No need.
Okay, I'll just ask a quick question of staff. If we do want to utilize some of these funds during the budget, we don't need to specify that today, we can make that decision as we go through the process.
That is correct. Specifically, I actually might ask Ms. Paras, or we will flag it for you when we go through it. When we get to the special revenue fund section of the budget process, this is where we go over things like the parking funds and SUMC funds. We'll flag it for the committee as an area where allocations could be made.
Okay. And then I have yet to review all of the over 1,000 pages of the budget. So can someone just tell me what we had in next year's budget for the shuttle, if anything? I know that we've gotten a grant from VTA, but I seem to recall that there's a local contribution that's required. Mr. Kami, magically appearing.
Hi, apologies. I'm joining from my phone, so I actually can't even see that I've come on video, but I'm glad you can see me. So we still are waiting for the grant funding agreement from VTA, but noting that it's a $2 million grant, it's over 2 years, so $1 million per year. Our local match is $250,000 per year for that, but we expect to recover all, if not, or most, if not all of that through the fare box because we are required to charge fares. That was part of our grant award.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. All right, well, then I look forward to supporting this motion. And we will go ahead and vote in order. Vice Mayor Burt.
Yes.
I'll vote yes, and Councilmember Filsath.
Yes.
All right, that passes unanimously. It's 3:45. Before we take our break, I just want to let the members of the public know, I know we have a lot of people attending and very interested in our next item, item 3. During the staff presentation, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. Depending on the number of people who are interested in speaking to us, I may decide to limit it to 1 minute. So I just want to prepare members of the public to be prompt in raising their hand and to be prepared to speak in 1 minute. I say that because last night we had public comment for the budget and the overall level, and then we will have public comment on the 11th and the 12th and the 17th and the 25th, and then again on June 21st. So there will be ample time. All right, let's take a 5-minute break and be back at 3:50. Thank you. My colleagues have returned. If you can turn your cameras back on, that would be great. Staff can rejoin us. Councilmember Filseth is hopefully going to rejoin us. Give them one more minute, and then we'll go ahead and start. Perhaps he's working on this worksheet. All right, let's go ahead and begin. I know there's a lot to cover. We are on action item 3, review and discuss fiscal year 2021-2022 proposed operating and capital budgets. Does staff have a presentation? Ms. Noze, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Cormack. Good afternoon, Finance Committee. Kylie Noze, Administrative Services Director. I'm here with, frankly, the budget team, your executive leadership team, your citywide budget team, I should say, both the central as well as the departments. And we're going to do our best to breeze through what is a pretty long presentation if you were actually to count the slides. But just as one point of clarification, what staff has done for ease of the public since we split this day into 2, and we had a discussion with the council last night, and now a continuation of that discussion today with the committee, we just layered on excuse me, the additional information. So staff will only present the new slides, but for ease of the public, when this presentation is posted, they will have all the materials from both last night and tonight. So with that, I will go through and kick it off a little bit here. And go through the overview and pass it off to Ms. Paras afterwards. Overview, this is a slide you've already seen, really talking about the balancing strategy and how we are working, and this budget is working to position the organization to respond to restoration of services and adapt as that recovery does take place. A new slide. We all kind of came through yesterday and were remiss at perhaps not articulating what this budget does instead of what this budget doesn't do. It still is in the general fund and across all funds, in general fund, a $205 million budget. So the city will continue a number of services, albeit modified. I don't want to diminish the impacts of the changes in services and service levels that are included in this budget. I also want to recognize that critical and core services will continue. Police and fire will respond to priority calls. If you need help, if you're having a crisis of a health emergency, they will respond. Utilities will continue working on delivering water, electric, gas, sewer services, all the things that you don't want to think about, but you need in your everyday lives. We'll be maintaining and keeping our rec spaces open. Perhaps a smaller number, but we still have libraries open. So we will be welcoming patrons 6 days of the week to our 2 main libraries. We'll be maintaining health and safety in various areas. So this is that scaling back of capital. We're not necessarily doing the keep up work anymore, frankly, but we will make sure that we are addressing any health and safety measures in our streets, roads, trees, and sidewalks. Community centers will remain open on modified schedules, obviously. The Development Center will continue to process permits, and traffic signals and education of youth through things like safe routes to school will continue. So just wanted to spend a moment on this slide on we are absolutely working through a really tough situation, but I also want to recognize that there are things that will continue as part of this budget. We talked about, yes, last night, the multi-year impact of the pandemic on the city's financials and our need for a fiscally solvent budget in 2022. We also talked about the proposed balancing strategy, so I won't go through this again. The only two things I will highlight are the variables on the far right, the yellow boxes, which are provided as part of the proposed budget for the Finance Committee's consideration in order to address things like unknown labor concessions or the council or committee's priorities in terms of use of ARPA funds or the service or CIP reductions. Again, a slide highlighting the capital improvement investments and the decline between 2020 actuals and 2021 and the very low levels that will continue in this 2022 proposed. So a few key takeaways after we've talked yesterday and as we will continue to talk today and move through, frankly, some long conversations over the next few weeks and multiple touch points. This is an iterative process. And as we've talked about, the proposed operating and capital budgets are not recommended or sustainable from a long-term perspective. And they really do recognize this point in time of where we're at. They recognize the council's direction to use that scenario B, our current status with our litigation and liabilities that we need to recognize and address. And while not what we're hoping for, they do achieve, like I said, making sure that we are responding to residents' urgent needs, that we are funding our long-term liabilities, that we are doing our best to position ourselves to restore or recover as the economy restores and recovers. With that brief overview, today we're going to get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts with the committee. So this is typically more what I think many of you would be used to. We're going to spend some time going through kind of a citywide perspective, citywide trends that you might find in the budget documents, and we sometimes can lose sight of when we're looking at an individual department. And if you take a step back, something that's happening across the organization, things like that might be workers' compensation, they might be position allocations, salaries and benefits and the like. We'll move through our operating budget and the different components of it, capital budget, and then at the very end, we're going to wrap together on the Finance Committee review and next steps associated with it. So how will we conduct ourselves over the coming few days? And this is more of a refresher for all of you since you've already been through this, but just for everyone's education. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ms. Peras, who will go through the proposed budget. Christine?
Thank you, Director Noze. This is the overview slide. Some of the, as Director Noze indicated, some of these are new and some of them are repeats from last night, and I'll try my best to draw out some of the highlights. If you recall, the citywide strategy of balancing the budget was done through a couple of solutions. The transfer to capital fund was reduced. We have labor, additional city pension and post-obligation benefit contributions continue, and we're also continuing a hiring freeze for positions and non-essential travel. Next slide. This is a new slide from last that we added today. This is citywide sources, which total about close to 590 million. You'll see from this chart that about half of that is related to net sales, which is related to our utilities. And interesting to note, major tax revenues, which we talk a lot about in the general fund, total about 16% of citywide funds. So in a way, large yet small in the grand scheme of things because of our utility. For point of reference, we're about down by 16% compared to last year, 2021. And that's driven by a decrease in other revenues. We had about programmed an upwards of 100 million for the proceeds of the public safety bonds. So that's the citywide view. Next slide for expense. Other side of the ledger. I kind of looked at this chart thinking things are done in quarters a little bit. We have capital investments, which total about 17 million, utility commodity purchases for electric, gas, and water, about a quarter of the citywide budget, and another 30% for salary and benefits, otherwise the people that provide services for the community. So looking at that quarter, and then the final quarter is a bunch of other items we spend funds on. Compared to prior year in 2021, we had a decrease of 14.3 million. And again, that was driven by public safety building. It was programmed in 2021 and that expense dropped in the capital plan, 2022. Next slide, thank you. This is historical staffing levels. You saw this slide last night. We're at about 490 in the general fund and 339 in the citywide, all staffing. So that's a down from prior year, obviously. And yep. Next slide. This is new. This provides an additional detail of citywide full-time positions. As you can see here, going all the way to the right of the chart, if you recall, in mid-year, we eliminated positions that were frozen in 2021. When we discussed the long-range financial forecast earlier this year, and the council adopted scenario B, that scenario did not assume restoration of service reductions that were taken in 2021. So that's the result of that. In addition, in 2022 net, we're looking at about 19.5 FTE reduction, which is total this year, including the positions that we eliminated that were frozen is 96 FTE reduction.
So just a note on this slide for everybody kind of wondering all of the numbers and all of the different components of it. When we talk about that position freeze elimination, and we talk about how the community hasn't seen the service impacts associated with what we've done in 2021, that's a big component of it. We made sweeping adjustments as part of our 2021 adopted 76 positions across all funds. And so that is a big component of this change that we've already realized and done the savings or realized the savings from. And so this proposed budget does an incremental additional about 20 positions. So just a distinction to remember as we move through really, frankly, what people probably haven't yet felt as a result of the pandemic restrictions.
Mm-hmm. This chart summarizes citywide salary and benefit changes as compared to last year's adopted budget. Overall, citywide, it's about a 3.2% increase and a 1.7% increase in the general fund. These increases are driven by pension and healthcare. The salary line shows the net that includes position eliminations. And so the pension rates are consistent with CalPERS that we presented in the fall. And now we're going to go into the operating budget. And we added the slide again. This is from last year, the 5-year view of scenario B from the long range financial forecast. And this is general fund revenues and comparison. So in this slide, I think it's a little bit different from last night where we included 19 actual, 20 actual, estimated and proposed. So in the overall, we have a 18% decrease compared to 2019, pre-pandemic. Right, major tax revenues. This slide will look familiar from our long-range financial forecast presentation. Overall, property, this is a summary of property sales tax, hotel tax, documentary transfer tax, and UUT, showing the dotted line of the pre-pandemic levels at about, I want to say about 135 million. And assuming the scenario B financial balancing scenario will be reaching that level around 2026. It's a 3 to 5 year recovery that we assumed in the model. This is general fund uses. You'll see this is an array and shows the percentage by city service area for the general fund. And this next slide has general fund budget highlights and some of the key assumptions in the proposed budget. Some of the key assumptions here are that the revenues are in alignment with scenario B as directed by the City Council, and it balances to a $13 million gap and includes pending utility transfer litigation that we've reserved. We're also assuming recognition of 1-year Arpa funds, American Rescue Plan Act of $6.25 million. We've also balanced the general fund assuming labor concessions of 0% general wage increases. And if not achieved, the likely solutions include tier 2 reductions, use of ARPA funds, or additional reserves. Right now, the proposed budget assumes a BSR percentage of 17 million. By council policy, we're to stay within a range of 15 to 20% with a target of 18%. So we're at 17.4 million. 17.4%, I should restate. This next slide talks about ARPA funds and tier 2 additional reductions. Just for your reference, the narrative of potential tier 2 reductions is included in the budget document in the overview section. So within our balancing strategy, we have one-time federal funding, and this is half of the 12.5 total distribution that we're expected to receive. We're using about 3 million of that funding to mitigate additional service reductions. Tier 2 service reductions are outlined, but not in the proposed budget balancing strategy. In the event that alternative proposal in the event that the city faces these situations, such as additional, more severe economic uncertainties, does not reach agreement with labor, or council chooses not to use ARPA funds to balance the budget, or any other alternatives are exhausted, tier 2 service reductions are there as an option for council finance committee to use.
And Ms. Pross, I think the next few slides are all the impacts that we had gone through previously. Would you like me to skip those?
Yes.
Okay, so let me go through the operating impacts. They are there for the council or the committee's reference as well as the public's. All right, I think we're at internal service funds.
Yes, and oftentimes when we do review the budget and each department in its own component, we often forget that a lot of the changes are driven by these charges from the internal services funds, which support a variety of things, including general benefits, citywide liability and claims, print and mail services, the cost for retiree medical, technology support, vehicle and workers' comp. So these budgets are developed within the street fund, and charges are distributed citywide to each department based on a variety of different methodologies. You'll see that in the overall, the percent change for these internal support charges is 7.9 million. 7.9%. I hope it's not 7.9 million. And the total change citywide is 9%.
One thing to call out on this, just for the committee's awareness, some of these year-over-year increases look large. On one end, some of it has to do with our annual evaluation of our liabilities, specifically in general liabilities and workers' compensation. We have an actuarial review annually on that, so we can set our reserves and confidence levels appropriately. However, a big component of this is draining the fund balance in these funds was part of our balancing strategy last year. So as an internal service fund, the revenue are our business partners. And so one of the items in terms of the 2021 balancing strategy is if there were available funds in the fund balance of any of these internal service funds, we did either basically like a rate pass, where we reduced the allocation in the 2021 budget and drew on fund balance in these funds. So some of the year-over-year increases are conflated by that one-time adjustment that was done as part of our 2021 adopted budget.
And within other funds, we also have summarized here parking funds, which I think we get into a little bit more detail in the next slide, but we also, utility rates, you saw that last night. Average increase $450 per month for residents bill. But getting to other funds, this is a quick snapshot of activity going on in those funds. I do recall a public speaker earlier earlier about the transportation management funds for 300. We have programmed in $350,000 in the budget. This can be found on page 92 of the operating budget and on a table on page 101 of the budget. And now we're going to get into the capital funds. Some of these slides you've seen last night. This one is from last night, going into the 5-year plan by project and also by type. Next slide. This is new. This is the overall this is the capital budget for all funds in 2022, totaling $153 million. About a third of it is for the general fund capital improvement plan, followed by wastewater treatment fund, 30.7 million, and electric and water fund. The capital plan will be reviewed on May 11th. This is also from last night, shows the various funding sources for the capital improvement plan for 2022. It totals close to 52 million. And these are the major capital investments that you will see on the 11th.
Okay, I will, thank you, Ms. Paras.
Thank you.
Go over a little bit of the meeting schedule and kind of next steps for the committee. And this is really kind of guiding principles that we always use when we go to the Finance Committee and review budget. And so this will be helping us as we move through the hearings on May 11th, 12th, and 25th. So that being said, the agendas have been posted for it. And so based on each agenda item, the usual kind of setup. So there'll be a combined brief presentation from departments by service area. And that will really highlight the budgetary information, areas of emphasis moving forward for the departments, and then moving to the committee for discussion questions with the 5-minute timer that we've been practicing today. We do take public comment after each of these agenda items typically, between the staff presentation and the committee discussion. As we move through the committee's business of, I believe it's Chair Cormack has said, the 1,000 some odd pages of material, we move through them with some recommended motions and some actions that help us move through the gray space, that is May 11th and 12th, before we get to May 25th, which ultimately the goal is for the committee to formulate their formal recommendation, ultimately for council adoption. So in the budget hearings themselves, the little green box on the bottom, typically as we go item by item, the committee will make tentative motions for approval of a certain item. That motion doesn't necessarily have to be approve it in full. Oftentimes there will be adjustments that are made to it, such as recommending something to be placed in the parking lot that we also practiced a little bit earlier this afternoon. Any tentative approval, parking lot placement, or requests for additional staff follow-up do require a majority vote. So that would be 2 votes from the committee. And usually that request for additional information for staff follow-up, if it is great, it's typically referred to the full council as a recommendation to be referred back to staff as part of budget adoption. If it's simple supplemental information, then staff will obviously do our best to respond during the committee review process so that the committee and the council have as much information that staff is able to provide to help them in their decision-making process. So what is the parking lot? What does it look like? And what is it used for is perhaps a question many are asking. So briefly, the parking lot is used as a list of running items that the committee will typically consider for restoring using funds that are available. And there's an example of what we typically show every time we're tracking this. So on the far right is the parking lot issues, where staff will be tracking the date, the issue, the dollar value in the department section in the book that the committee chooses to place something. So for example, I believe just based on item 1 tonight, we will be adding Junior Museum and Zoo fee structure to this list, and we'll add in that dollar value associated with it. We always review this every meeting, and specifically we'll make sure we review this at the end of our May 12th day. And this will ultimately be our basis of information for the City Council discussion on May 17th. So this is a tracking document that the staff and the committee typically use to move through this process. And we'll remind you of it at the beginning of, every day, just so you, in the, 8 hours that you go home to sleep, we'll remember where we're at when you wake up and start at 9 a.m. the next day. And then ultimately, like I said, this will really help inform and focus your discussion with the council on May 17th as an interim step. And like I said, the resolution of the parking lot items and issues is to be resolved as part of the May 25th Finance Committee meeting, as part of the final recommendation from the committee to the full council for ultimate budget adoption. And lastly, just for the community, again, lots of places and times to engage on this item. And so really just want to continue to encourage to continue to join the conversation. We've now moved through our Finance Committee meeting today on May 4th, obviously pending our deliberations here. The online survey will be released to the public tomorrow. We do have a budget town hall on Thursday evening this week. We have all of our committee hearings that we just referred to, the Finance Committee update at City Council on May 17th, all moving towards that June 21 budget adoption. A couple questions actually had come up previously on how to gain access to these documents. The documents are all linked to the agendas for May 12th, May 11th, today's agenda item, as well as yesterday's, so they should be readily accessible. If not, our presentations all have the URL down here at the bottom, which will take you to the central budget page, which will always have any materials that staff are presenting as part of these hearings. We'll make sure that they're posted by the end of the meetings, and also obviously have the budget documents themselves. So sorry for that housekeeping, but with that, I will turn it back to Chair Cormack and the public.
Thank you, Director Nose. And I'll just ask members of the public who are interested in providing public comment to go ahead and raise your hands, and I'll give you a moment to do that, and we'll assess the level of interest and the amount of time we'll assign. While we're waiting for the members of public to do that, Ms. Nose, I see there's going to be a survey, and when will the results of that survey be available? Where will they be informing us in our deliberations?
Sure. So staff plan to keep it open while we have these deliberations. So what we'll do is we'll do our best to take a snapshot, not a formal report out, but just a pulse on where things are at so that we can inform the Finance Committee at the May probably 12th committee meeting. And then ultimately we'll make sure we'll basically keep a pulse on it as we move through this process with final and formal feedback by the 25th. So as we present the wrap-up memo, we will make sure that all of the survey information is finalized and presented as part of that wrap-up and additional information that staff typically provide to the committee at that time.
Okay, so in my own words, we'll integrate that throughout the process?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, let us then go to members of the public. I see that we have 7. We'll go ahead and allow 2 minutes for each public comment. And we will stop taking public comment in 2 minutes. Now everybody's putting their hands up.
Yes, thank you. Our first speaker is Miss Judith Content.
And when Judith is done speaking, we will stop taking additional public speakers.
Okay, thank you, Chair Cormack. And Miss Judith, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Hello, this is Judith Content, and it would be my pleasure to address the City Council and Finance Committee on the subject of the Palo Alto Art Center. This is a jewel of the community, and as we emerge from a year of isolation, it seems like the perfect time to return to the community of the Palo Alto Art Center. Children, students, teens, and adults all have well-established, highly regarded programs awaiting them there. Project Look, Cultural Kaleidoscope, Free Family Days, and the exemplary Gallery Arts program are among them. The cuts proposed in today's budget would effectively eliminate all art center programming. It would put staff retention at risk. It would put the very art center at risk, exactly when we need community art services most. I respectfully ask the City Council and Finance Committee to keep the current art center funding as it is. It has already been reduced significantly, resulting in almost half of the staff being let go. So the Art Center is poised to contribute to the health and well-being of this community. Please, I respectfully ask you, don't take away something that makes Palo Alto the special place it is.
Thank you, Ms. Judith. And our next speaker is Jeremy Ehrman, and our final speaker is Mary Kloner. Jeremy, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes on the timer.
Thank you. I frankly don't understand this budget and the staff's approach to it and the council's response to it. Last night and also somewhat today, we've heard members of the staff and the council talk about this as being a zero-sum game, that things can't be added in because that means that something else will have to be cut. That makes no sense to me. All items in this budget are not equal. It's not zero-sum. Everything is not, if you cut one thing that's important, it does not mean that if you add something in that's important, it does not mean you have to cut something else that's really important. It's not zero-sum to members of the public. These things have different values to them. I still understand how it is that the staff and many members of the council seem to see it all as equal, so therefore it's all equally depressing. This is really confusing to me, and I'm really concerned that there's no sense of priorities among staff and council. This budget is also slightly higher than last year's, yet there are even more cuts being made than last year. So I don't understand how you cannot at least maintain the current levels of service. many of which in fact never went into effect because it seems there were things budgeted for this year, which didn't happen because of COVID. So it seems there should have been some savings from the budget, but no one talks about that. So I'm just really confused with this process, and I don't understand why the city is not looking for new sources of funding. The old models are not working. It's an emergency. When that happens, you have to go out and change what you do. But the city is essentially saying, well, we can't change anything. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. If you want more funding for things like the Children's Theater and Children's Library and the Art Center, you can find it. Donations, grants, higher taxes, people, salary concessions. There's so many things that can be done to change the narrative. But the city staff and many in council, their response is, oh, we can't do anything. This is just the way it is. I'm sorry, but it's not just the way it is. And the reason that you are on the council is to change things and help things. And so please, actually do things, make changes.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Chris Robel. Chris, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Thank you very much. So dovetailing on that prior conversation from Jeremy, I think there's two ways that this has to be met, either increasing revenue or reducing expenses. Now, the approach that's being taken here, I think, is fundamentally problematic. So let's start with the expense side first, because that's the first place to start, is reducing expenses. I do not see why we're doing things like reducing the less expensive crossing guards, children's theater, libraries, those things that are important to the community, when there are other ways and bigger dollar items that could be tackled. So for example, it's been over a year, and I think we need to understand exactly how many people managers are there in the 939 employees that are in the proposed budget. So we have no visibility into that despite the 1,000+ page document. So I think that's important to understand. And so it's not the frontline workers that are actually doing the work, but the people that are in, the city hall building, that maybe there's some activities that could be combined, because those are the expensive people, because the salaries are going up 3% despite those cuts. So that means, and it's not, so that's one key area. Another one on the expense side is looking at the activities that drive cost and saying, okay, more important than, the crossing guards are important, right? And safety is important, but maybe we don't need our streets swept every single week when it's not the fall season. And in our neighborhood in Old Palo Alto, they're swept every single week in front of my house. I don't know why, but that's an example of an activity that I don't think most people would highly value, cleaning it every week. Another one is with the residential parking. Why not increase the price of a ticket from $50 to $150 if you break the law and violate in a permit zone? So these are examples of things that I think are opportunities. And then the last thing I just say really quickly with 14 seconds is, where are we with the business tax? All right, we need to have a business tax. We're one of the only cities that doesn't, and this will fund all these other issues, but not on the revenue. I plead that please do not do a resident parcel tax, which I know some are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jonathan Ehrman. Jonathan, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
All right, can you hear me? Great. I just want to say, so here we are again. This seems to be a constant thing that happens in this city. And if we know that this is going to be an issue with budgets, then why aren't we preparing ahead? Why aren't we being prudent so that we know that residents don't want these programs to suffer? Why aren't we figuring out a way to make it possible so that these programs will always be there? The problem with cuts especially in the arts and in some cases community services, is that historically, when you make certain cuts, especially staffing cuts, these don't come back, right? If you cut the number of police officers or firemen, fire people, if when times are better, you'll hire more. But when you cut arts and staff positions like that, arts, theater positions, those don't come back. So what you're doing with these things is using these crises to cut these programs permanently forever for the community, not just now, but continuing on a diminution of these programs. Why can't we be prudent? If cuts mean, and also increasing fees radically to increase cost recovery doesn't really work. If you have like a $5 fee to go to the Junior Museum, if you want to increase that to a $6 fee, maybe that makes sense. $17, $18, it doesn't make sense. It's better to find a way to give something to people for free that they will come and that they can enjoy and have access to, and that you can get donations. Also, I wonder about, cuts, non-union positions. What about salary cuts for the non-union positions? And why don't we, I would rather see hours cut. For example, libraries. Why don't we, less hours is preferable than closing libraries or laying off people. Right now, the Palo Alto libraries have finally reopened. They're open more hours right now than the Mountain View Public Library, and Mountain View is in a better position than us. So things like that, we're not being prudent, and we need to be. We need to acknowledge that this is going to happen, and we need to work to keep those things that we value.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nielsen Buchanan, followed by Penny Elson and Cynthia Cole. Nielsen, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Thank you. I have a process question. I've gotten some of the content information I needed about the TMA budget. It's not clear to me when's the most productive time for me to comment on the TMA budget. This is a comprehensive opportunity for public to give input, but it's not clear to me about when it's productive for me to talk with you all. Can you address that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And our next speaker is Penny Elson, followed by Cynthia Cole and Rebecca Eisenberg. Ms. Penny Elson, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes on the timer.
Thank you. So I want to start by saying I'm glad to see that the city is maintaining its commitment to safe routes to school education for students in the district. I think that's going to be more important than ever if the city is serious about cutting crossing guards by 50% and reducing its investment in school commute route engineering improvements. I'm very concerned about some of these cuts. We're already sort of bare bones, and I hope someone is talking with the school district about possibly filling that gap with the crossing guards at minimum. Let's see. I also want to say that I was disappointed when I went to the meeting website today and saw no meeting materials posted. I clicked on the budget item, expecting to see a staff report and a presentation because I wanted to prepare for the meeting and could not. And I frankly find the amount of information here overwhelming to absorb in the time that we've had here today. So I hope that in the future, these materials will be posted in advance, perhaps at the same time that you're releasing them to the committee members. Let's see. And then finally, I concur with the question about the detailed organizational chart. I'm very interested in seeing that as well. I heard last night it was going to be prepared sometime soon. People have been asking for that for a long time. Let's see it. And I think, and I have some questions about the Charleston Rostradero plan. I noticed today actually that there was actually a lower bid that nobody talked about last night. And I want to understand what happened with that. So I'll be following up with staff on that subject. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Cynthia Cole, followed by Rebecca Eisenberg and the YCS admin. Cynthia, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Hi. My name is Cynthia Cole, and I am currently the chair of the governance committee of the Palo Alto Art Center Foundation board. I am also an attorney, and I am a mother of a child who participates in the leadership and the team programs at the Art Center. And I am extremely dismayed to see that these budget cuts effectively reduce the Art Center to a purely transactional experience for the community. Last year's budget cut was $364,000 and reduced the staff by 4.26 FTE, the largest in the Art Center's history. The current proposed cut is an additional $208,000 and 2.16 FTE. That's a total of $572,000 and cuts out the cut out of a $1.3 million total operating budget. That's almost half. With the proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year, the Art Center would have the equivalent of 4 full-time staff and 5 part-time staff. That's the smallest in the Art Center's history, a history which, unfortunately, I think I need to remind you, goes back, a number of decades. This would be actually the 50th anniversary of the Art Center. With the pending with this pending cut, the Art Center loses all city support for the exhibition program, all teen programs, all free family day programs, Project Look, and Cultural Kaleidoscope. Again, effectively reducing the Art Center to a community center that is purely transactional and does not show anything about the diversity and leadership that the Art Center provides. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Rebecca Eisenberg, followed by the YCS admin and Mara Wallace. Ms. Rebecca Eisenberg, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Thank you. How do you turn the richest city in the country into the city that is quickly becoming the worst place to live? First, you sell off 80% of our land to businesses. Then you offer these businesses tax exemptions, even when they're taxed in every other city where they're located. In the past 2 years, large business taxes and payroll taxes on the highest paid executives at the biggest companies have passed by voters in countless other cities with median 80% of the voting public. But you don't want to try that here. Another way that cities increase revenue is with strong code enforcement departments. Cities with approximately the amount of commercial development that we have here, on average, bring in $50 million a year with coding fines and penalties. But you dismantled the enforcement office, even though you knew at the time that it was revenue positive for the city. How do you think your decisions are affecting Palo Alto? Do you expect the community to say, yes, I want to live in Palo Alto because it delayed the safety improvements that are essential to allow children to bike to school safely? Do you think, yes, I want to live in a place that eliminates the best children's theater program in the region, the only children's library in the county, and the art center that showcases our community's art? Do you think, yes, I really want to live in the city that charges $20 per toddler to enter the Children's Museum? Do you think that these choices are making Palo Alto a good place to live? Do you really think that people will move here because, wow, we have the nicest looking police headquarters and jail? You have many choices here. You have, hopefully, a brain. You can choose to tax businesses, or you can choose to destroy our city. It's up to you.
Thank you, Ms. Eisenberg. Our next speaker is the YCS admin, followed by Mara Wallace and the Palo Alto Arts Center Foundation. The YCS admin, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Thank you. I apologize. My name's Mora, M-O-R-A, Oommen, O-O-M-M-E-N, instead of YCS admin. Good afternoon, Finance Committee. At last night's City Council meeting, Councilmember Greer Stone made a powerful case on behalf of our youth and children. In addition, Councilmember Pat Burt highlighted ways to consider options so that this is not a zero-sum game. I appreciate both of their comments. I volunteer on a number of local boards, including the Palo Alto Rec Foundation and the Mother Symposium. However, today I speak as the Executive Director of Youth Community Service, YCS, and a mother of a teenager and a resident of Palo Alto. I urge the Finance Committee to please recommend to the Council to not make the cuts being proposed in the budget for children and youth programs that protect their emotional, mental, and physical health and wellness. Specifically, I want to focus on teen programming, which is, for example, calling to eliminate funding for the programs at the Rinconada Park and the Youth Community Services Mental Health Wellness Program called Youth Connectedness Initiative, YCI, YCI, since its inception in 2018, has been co-funded by the County of Santa Clara and the City of Palo Alto. The county has already extended the YCI contract for the coming year with the Behavioral Health Services Department to continue to develop social emotional learning as a suicide prevention tool. To continue the program at its current capacity, YCS requests the Palo Alto City Council to renew Palo Alto's portion of the budget. I'm grateful for all the city staff does, and I personally volunteer hours of time on the Palo Alto Recreation Foundation board to raise funds for the Recreation Department. We know cuts need to be made, but our children and youth programs and services should not be sacrificed, especially this year when the COVID-19 pandemic has taken a huge toll on our children and youth. A petition that parents have sent around has already garnered over 250 supporters in the last 24 hours on this very topic. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Mara Wallace, followed by the Palo Alto Arts Center Foundation and Mary Gloner, our final speaker. Mara, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Thank you so much. I want to start just by saying thank you. I'm listening to this meeting and admittedly don't come to them often enough, but I am filled with respect and appreciation for these council members and particularly the Finance Committee members. It's clear your job is onerous and thank you for doing it. I appreciate it. I am here to speak on behalf of the Arts Center, a resource that I use and relish and enjoy and think that it is incredibly important that it not only survive but thrive, again, particularly in these times. I would echo all that's been said, but I would add to that, in slashing a budget so dramatically, it essentially kneecaps the organization and sets it up to fail. And I think there have to be creative ways that we can work together, again, perhaps private and public hand in hand, but rather than take away the revenue source of the Arts Center and leave it to just flounder and struggle, why not think of ways that we can increase those revenue streams, again, with the help of the public, with the many people who love the Arts Center and happy to work for it and with it and inside of it. Karen Kenzel is an absolute superstar in her field. We are so lucky to have her. If we lose her, it would be disastrous, and shame on us if we do. So I really want to encourage creative thinking and not slashing of budget for the Arts Center. And I thank you so much. And I do have one question. I don't know how to ask a question that gets an answer, but I read a couple of years ago that we were planning on purchasing a work of art for the new police center from a not local artist at the cost of approximately $750,000. And I don't know if that's still the plan. If it is, I'd love to suggest that we scrap that plan, get a local artist to do something for much less money and support the Arts Center. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Our next speaker is the Palo Alto Arts Center Foundation, followed by Mary Gloner, our final speaker. I have unmuted. If you can unmute yourself, that'd be much appreciated. And you'll have 2 minutes for the public comment.
Thank you. I'm Karen Kwan, the Development Director with the Palo Alto Arts Center Foundation. I want to remind the Council and the Finance Committee that before JMZ, the largest public-private capital campaign was that with the Palo Alto Arts Center Foundation. The donors who contributed to the capital campaign and continue to support the annual funds of the Arts Center expect the city to continue its baseline support, and at this difficult time, to explore other ways, such as using the federal stimulus to protect jobs, different capital projects, and making more equitable reductions across all community services. Let's not forget the gem of the city also include the Arts Center that is celebrating its 50th anniversary. I also want to read you a quote from a former intern of the Arts Center. The Arts Center has provided, and this is from Chelsea Stewart, the Arts Center has provided an abundance of opportunities for me, not only as an emerging artist, but as a person who is furthering her interest in the gallery management art business practices sector. After my internship with the Arts Center, I've been able to obtain gallery jobs within the Palo Alto community because of the Arts Center and its resources. I have become involved in the Silicon Valley arts community through Content Magazine because of my connections with the Arts Center. As someone who is a huge supporter in the arts and providing arts education as well as paid internships within the arts sector, I find these inequitable budget cuts toward the Arts Center disappointing and feel let down by the Palo Alto community if they were to continue. The Arts Center is a catalyst for many different types of people, whether it be a 4-year-old learning how to hold a paintbrush or a retired couple looking to fill their pastime with a new hobby. I would not be where I am today in my career field, mental health, or in the level of art experiences that I am without Palo Alto Arts Center. The Arts Center staff and employees are the grounding features of the Arts Center, and these opportunities and deserve to be treated with that respect financially. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final speaker is Mary Gloner. Mary, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Thank you again, Chairperson Cormack, Vice Mayor Burt, and Council Member Filsett for the opportunity to speak. My name is Mary Gloner. I am the CEO of Project Safety Net. It is the community coalition founded by the city, dedicated to youth well-being and suicide prevention. But I also speak to you today as an individual who grew up in East Palo Alto and Palo Alto, as a Palo Alto Unified School District alum, as well as a public health educator, dedicated my life to addressing racial health disparities and having benefited from the various well-being services that this city spearheaded and invested. I am here to speak in support of many of the programs that whose substantially reduced budget will negatively impact the well-being of youth, especially those who are most vulnerable. Many of these innovative programs provided to this community have collectively made City of Palo Alto a model for other communities, not only regionally, but nationwide. More importantly, they serve as protective factors against suicide ideation, anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues that has plagued this community in shaping its city's narrative. But yet again, these are the same programs that are redefining this youth narrative to represent empowerment, strength, and resiliency, such as the upcoming Palo Alto Center sponsored Black Index Teen Workshop, especially in light of the racial unrest that we're experiencing and outcoming of the racial impact of COVID. So as we know, the budget reflects the values of its community. And as an executive, I know how leadership truly reveals itself during the most difficult times, such as we are expecting collectively. It's easy to be a leader in good times, but a wise and strong leader is those who can move us forward and support our young people right now. So thank you.
Thank you. And Chair Cormack, there are no other speakers.
Thank you to the clerk, and thank you to everyone who spoke. A little out of order, but I'm just going to go ahead and answer. There are a fair number of questions, and I think some of them are pretty straightforward to address. Could staff just say when the presentation was posted to the either to the agenda or the website?
The presentation hasn't been posted. We're actually working on that as we speak. The presentation is transmitted to the committee as soon as the meeting is starting, and staff works on it on the back end to post it publicly.
Okay, I thought I saw the little red thing. I went and checked the agenda, but if you click on that, it doesn't work right now.
The presentation or the budget document?
Presentation.
Oh, we might have already gotten it up there.
Okay, it's traditionally, but is it provided to the public at the same time it's provided to the council?
That's correct. So
Right.
I just got word from our clerk's office. It was posted 30 minutes prior to the meeting.
Okay. Thank you for that. There was a question from the member of the public about the TMA. Am I correct that that would be Wednesday, May 12th at 11 a.m.? All
Yes, you
right.
are.
So the member of the public who'd like to speak about the TMA can speak to item 2 on Wednesday, May 12th, which is tentatively scheduled for 11 a.m. The question about public art for the police station, I'm going to answer and see if staff can correct me if I make a mistake, but that is funded through the Public Art 1% program. And I believe the artist was selected through the Public Art Commission, and that was done a number of years ago, frankly, before the police station even was approved. So it's not possible to reappropriate that funding. I think, in fact, the art's already been created, if I'm not mistaken. And then finally, there are a number of comments, repeated comments from members of the public about new revenue models. We will be covering that in June here at the Finance Committee as soon as we get through the budget. Okay, And if I missed your question, feel free to just send us an email, and if staff caught any other ones, we can go there. All right, let me turn to my colleagues again, just setting the stage. We had an overview on this last night, and we'll be doing the details starting a week from today. Would either of my colleagues like to make some remarks or ask any questions?
Yeah, I can.
The Vice Mayor, go right ahead.
So first, at a high level in the presentation and materials, I had a couple concerns. One is that, at least in the presentations, the general fund is in almost most of the slides intermixed with the utilities and the enterprise funds. And I think it's really valuable to keep them for the most part as separate issues. The decisions that we make are separate. Their revenues are separate. Utilities and many of the enterprises are fee-based, and so I think that would help with the clarity of the presentations. I also find the transmittal letter to be a really important document in general. I struggled with understanding a number of the things that were being presented there, and particularly on pages 10 and 11, I asked other people to read them and see if they had the same issues, and generally they did, including a couple of people who have finance backgrounds, so I can go over that with staff later. But I think that's very important for the public to be able to have that summary overview in a way that is clear to the readers. I also haven't seen much either out of last year or this year on kind of strategic reforms in some of these areas. We've had, understandably, last year initially, and then a continuing this year of kind of a triage approach. And in the first year of a crisis, like we had in the Great Recession and like we had last year, that's kind of the reality, is that there isn't time to begin to figure out more strategic responses. But I'm still not seeing much of that this year. We did, over a several year period, a great deal more of outsourcing, which doesn't happen overnight. We understand that each of those initiatives involves labor negotiations, it involves outside contractors, a variety of things. But that's the sort of thing that I think we need to begin to start working on. Otherwise, we're just slashing our programs without really figuring out more innovative and entrepreneurial ways to provide services. And I'd say within that, there are other enterprise type revenues that we should be looking at, and some, as well as maybe some program reconsiderations. One program reconsideration that I have is the TMA. Basically, it's been shut down for the last year and a quarter from its intended purpose and what it was doing, and yet we're still funding it. And it was a group that was established under an understanding that the business community was going to largely take over the funding. That's never happened. So now the city continues to fund it, and it's not doing the functions that it was designed to do. But it appeared last year that rather than eliminate it, there was this kind of more of a notion that, we might be dealing with a crisis of a few months of a disruption, as opposed to something that is now a year and a quarter in to the emergency, and it's and then the recovery really brings into question at what point in the future the services that used to be provided by the TMA would still be needed, or would become needed again, I should say. I was an original strong supporter of it. I still think in principle it has a lot of value. I think the execution of it has been very flawed from the outset, and the financial commitments that were not lived up to by the business community have put the burden unduly on the city. But all that was the case even before they basically stopped providing the services that they were intended to do. And then I really want to, I'll wait until next round, but I want to talk more about what is the actual range of additional resources that we can tap into within what's available to us as a council and as a city that are not so much a zero-sum game, that we have in hardship years, additional resources that we can really look at using to bridge the gap to a recovery. So I'll talk more about that next go round.
Thank you. Councilmember Filson.
Well, yeah, a couple of thoughts. First of all, I'll do the negative one first and then the more positive one. You know, I think the Vice Mayor brought up something that I think we need to keep in context here, is that even before the pandemic and the drama and pain of that, at least financial, you know, we still had some significant challenges, which is a number of our expense areas, you know, have been growing faster than our revenues for years. And, you know, it's a structural kind of thing that can't scale forever. And so the Vice Mayor's comments on, you know, sort of really looking at how we deliver services and so forth is, you know, I think that remains something that we got to do independent of COVID recovery and all that kind of stuff. So I think we need to keep looking at that. And, you know, again, that's not something that will be fixed overnight or in this budget cycle or one budget cycle, but it's a mandate the city has to stay focused on. The second is, you know, I think we're absolutely right to plan conservatively. Okay, but there are a couple of potential sources of upside, which are, you know, the macroeconomic situation in the country looks cautiously optimistic, and we haven't seen that here in Palo Alto yet. There's no guarantee that it will arrive, but I think there could be some upside there. The other upside isn't, you know, I mean, the current federal administration is in a mode of you know, investing and spending money on infrastructure and our society, and we haven't seen that either here, at least not very much. But something like that could happen as well. So there are a number of sources of upside. So as we go through this, I think to the points that some of the speakers sort of touched on this a little bit, is that we ought to be judicious in sort of doing things in such a way that, you know, we're keeping an eye out that if we get the opportunity that, you know, we do have more flexibility, then we've done stuff in such a way that we can scale back up, right? If we should get the chance, right? Again, I think we're absolutely right to plan for what things look like today and not count on any of that kind of stuff. That would be foolish. Bad stuff could happen too. Okay, but I think as we go through this, we ought to have an eye on, okay, what's the upside contingency if fortune should smile on us. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Councilmember Filseth. Could I ask staff to put up, I think it was slide 6, it's the bar slide with the colors. We haven't talked very much at all today about a few important things, and the mayor, I think, did a nice job last night of mentioning them. Yes, thank you so much. And the first is the blue bar there, the 8.4. Contrary to some comments that we've received recently, the city is absolutely planning. We have a reserve established for the utilities transfer litigation. It's a significant amount of money, and it's driving many of the changes that we must make this year. The second thing I wanted to point out was the 1.6 over on the right-hand side. And this is where we're hoping, although we realize it's a lot to ask in a difficult year, again, for our employees to join with us and keep their salaries flat. So we don't have to get to the tier 2 reductions. And so we have some opportunity potentially to restore some of the cuts in the light green section, which is the 7.7. So I just wanted to, we've spent some time on some of the other details, just lay that out. Thanks so much. You can take that down now. I appreciate the Councilmember Philseth talking about the disparity between the national recovery and what we have here. And I think it's really important that we keep that in mind. We do depend on our visitors at the margin to pay for many things. And I think this is one of the structural changes that we're going to have to consider, how we fund these services that we want, and we're going to have to figure out how to pay for them. Nobody wants to eliminate these amazing things that have been so wonderful for so many families, including my own. Nobody wants to do that. So we'll have to figure out what our medium-term strategy is. Speaking of strategies, one of the strategies we used last year was a set aside. It was in the $700,000 range, as I recall, because we didn't know what we didn't know. And I certainly wouldn't have predicted that we would have ended up using it for rent forgiveness at Coverly, but it made all the sense in the world later on as we went through that. So I think it's important for us to have in the back of our minds that one of the items in the 3.2 million might be a set aside or a reserve for what we don't know and what will change. That served us quite well this year in terms of dealing with that. In terms of planning conservatively, I do think that's important. At the moment, right, the weather is lovely and our numbers are fantastic here. But if we look at what's happening to our friends and neighbors and colleagues in India, I'm not yet convinced by all the medical, data that we're out of the woods here for, the foreseeable future. I'm hopeful, but I don't want us to set ourselves up for a situation where we'll just have significant problems and not be able to deal with them. And then finally, I think I wanted to just remind people there'll be a town hall on Thursday night. This is a really difficult format and it's even harder when we're virtual, right? And at the break, you can't sort of walk up to your friend and neighbor that you know and say, hey, I didn't understand that, what's happening, or can I have a moment? So I think the town hall on Thursday night will be an opportunity to have it be a few more questions and back and forth. And, I certainly commit to doing my best to answer any emails that people send if there are specific questions. So with that, I'll just remind my colleagues that this is not an action item. This is sort of setting the stage for how we'll do our work on the 11th and 12th. But Vice Mayor, I believe you wanted another turn, so we'll go back to you.
Yeah. So I want to review some of the other ways in which we could help fill and fill some of the funding gaps and retain more of the services that are presently being proposed to be slashed upon slashes from last year. And as we are hearing from members of the public, one, they're starting to be able to understand the ramifications of the cuts from last year that weren't really visible. And then on top of that, they're having a layer of additional cuts. And I think we need to re-examine what assumptions we make. Are we entering the first year of a recovery? And if so, what do we want to do to bridge our needs so that we aren't really destroying so many of the programs and services that are what our community relies on and deeply values and even has needs. I mean, we're still looking at cuts in public safety as well on top of cuts in public safety. So first, we have a reserve and it's a budget stabilization reserve that we have. And that is a reserve that we typically set ranges on, but it's a reserve there for emergencies. And it's hard to argue that we've run into a bigger emergency in decades than the one that we've been in the last year and are still in. And yet we haven't really thought or been willing to consider using an additional portion of that reserve. Far from the totality. I don't want to run it down anywhere near zero, but we have, Ms. Nose, we have how many dollars, and where are we in relation to our range again?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Vice Mayor. We are currently sitting at 17.4% of our adopted budget, or not adopted, I'm sorry, the current 2022 proposed budget. Your range is between 15% and 20%. Every about $5 million is about a 2.5% decrease in that percentage, just as a kind of metric to help.
Okay, so we're closer to the midpoint of a range entering the second year of an emergency. And I think we should really consider whether we should be willing to move toward the low end of the range. Now that range is also something that is set as a policy by council, and that can be adjusted. I wouldn't advocate moving outside the range, but I would be open to considering moving toward the low end of the range in this period. We also have, in this budget proposal, we have less in our capital improvement plan than the last 2 years, but far more than we had in recent years. And it is the revenue streams that feed the capital improvement plan, which are the hotel taxes, that have crashed the most. And so we've worked hard to build up that capital program, and in recent years to invest heavily in capital projects that were overdue. And I spent many years working on doing just that. That doesn't mean that we should necessarily continue at a moderately high pace in the middle of the second year of an emergency. And we have community choices on whether we retain more of our services versus at this point in time and this year, continuing to make strong investments in our infrastructure. We also have the question of what level of recovery to project. I do want to ask, there was one revenue stream on, I think it's slide 19, I'm not sure, 18 or 19, that showed a decline in the property tax. Did I read that correctly? Slide 19. And it shows a $2 million decline in property tax from estimated 2021 to FY 2022. Is that right?
That's correct, Vice Mayor. So that decline is a reflection of the volatility of the ERAF funds. And so typically in terms of our property tax, we see extraordinarily healthy growth. In times of contractionary periods, we typically see it fall flat. And so what the current long-range scenario forecasts is that the baseline property tax stays flat, and staff have also adjusted the one-time ERAF funds. It's also an area that I will say, Councilmember.
Why don't you share the acronym of ERAF?
Supplemental Educational
Revenue Augmentation Fund.
Thank you. Revenue Augmentation Fund. And this is when the property taxes that are allocated to schools are fully met, and therefore there's excess, and the cities and other agencies can get supplemental. So it's typically considered a one-time or a volatile revenue stream. We do get some annually, but we just don't necessarily know the amount. The other component of that, on why we're a little bit more skeptical on how much we'll receive year over year, is that has to do with, one, the growth of property tax across the state and within our county, really, and how that's allocated. So maybe our property tax base is doing fine, but maybe other jurisdictions are not. And then the last one is there's actually litigation that's outstanding between our county and the state of California on how it's allocated. And so we've been advised by the county to pull back on the amount that we recognize if we want to reserve what potentially could be impacted by that ongoing litigation between those two parties. So anyway, that's a lot of detail about why it's a slight decline. And I guess lastly, I'll point out that Councilmember Phil said articulated, frankly, as part of long range that in his, it was some revenues looked maybe a little aggressive, but in others, we potentially have some room. And property tax was one of those that we potentially have some room. But amongst the balance seemed appropriate.
Well, and I'd be interested at our follow-up meeting seeing a better breakdown of the basis for projecting a decline in property tax. And I want to hear more about what the county assessor is projecting, what the school district is projecting. That was a big surprise to me. And I wonder whether it's overly conservative. So I have a few other comments. I can either wrap them up now or come to another round.
Why don't you wrap them up now? This should be our last round.
Okay. So another potential source that the staff had mentioned is whether we want to tap into more of the Stanford University Medical Center funds, and that's a possibility. And then I was starting to say on the capital improvement plan, I think that we may want to consider further reductions in that and further reductions in the transfer to the plan. We have a general fund transfer, and then we have our transit orient or our TOT, our hotel tax transfer. And Ms. Jose, is that the hotel tax transfer, is that really two buckets within that? One is the amount from the new hotels that we had committed as a policy commitment on to help fund the infrastructure plan. And the other is the incremental increase from the hotel tax. Are both of those part of that TOT transfer?
So from my understanding, and this predates me, that although the most recent TOT increase I was a part of, that the TOT increase as well as the new hotels were by council policy allocated towards the 2014 capital city council approved infrastructure plan.
Yeah, so I actually initiated that. And we had two different aspects of it. One was a commitment that was a non-binding, but an intention commitment to the voters that was on the incremental increase in the TOT tax that we would dedicate it to infrastructure. And I'm inclined to continue with that, even though we didn't tell voters that we'd continue to do that in the event of an emergency, and that we do that and still do that while we cut services that are essential to the community. But the other part was the amount from the additional new hotels after a certain date that we were dedicating that to the TOT transfer. That was merely a policy decision of the council. That was not a commitment to the voters. And so that is not binding in any way other than the council saying, we still think that's a good idea, or in this circumstance, we don't think that's a good idea. Molly, I wasn't sure if you were wanting to weigh in on that in any way or no. Okay, sorry.
And so Councilmember or Vice Mayor Burt, just to be clear, both of them are non-binding decisions.
I was making that distinction. So one is politically a commitment that we made to the voters, and the other was merely a decision of the council. And the one that was a political commitment to the voters was one that was not in the context of an emergency, is the distinction I was making.
Got it.
And then lastly, really looking at, I want to look more at some potential enterprise revenues, and this is a little more in the same category as the things like outsourcing. But it was just struck me today that for instance, at our golf course, we've had on hold an expansion of the driving range, which is a huge revenue generator. Now that's an enterprise fund, but there are ways in which that indirectly affects us in other budgetary areas. So that's not something I want to go into detail right now, but it's an example of things like some of the Art Center folks had suggested that there may be some other opportunities for revenue generation And so I want to make sure that we're considering that going forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Filseth.
I just wanted to make a point here. Can you bring up the slide with you know, the blue bar on it and you know the green thing?
This one?
Yeah, that one. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I think, you know, a couple people brought this up, and you know, I mean, this is going to be a little bit analogy-ish, but because the legal complexity around here is it's pretty complex and murky. And if you think it's really simple, then you know there's more there. Okay, but that 8.4 million is a one-time thing. That said, what's behind it is a $4 million a year transfer into the general fund. And so you can think of that, again, this is not literally what it is, but you can analogize that to a $4 million a year tax cut. And a number of the speakers talked about tax increases and tax cuts and so forth, but you can think about that in kind of that light. And given that there's a deterministic relationship between services and taxes, it's a useful perspective to ponder. Thanks.
Could staff just clarify whether that 8.4 is one time or ongoing?
Sure. What I suspect, if I'm reading what Councilmember Filseth just said, is there are two components to the utilities transfer ongoing dispute that we have. One is one that is an ongoing component and right now is estimated at about $4 million annually. There's another component that has a $12.6 million, as some of the public and the noticing is identified, one-time cost, and that has to do with past remedies. And so this 8.4 million is a combination of those two components. And it is dealing with both the, what I will call 4 million annual ongoing, as well as a 4-year kind of build up or phase in or kind of stockpiling in order to pay the current 12.6 million one-time component.
Okay, so I think I followed that.
So it's
the 8.4 is not one time. It has a component that is one time, and that component will be replicated in the out years.
For 4 years.
For 4 years, okay. And then the other ongoing part is the part that Councilmember Filseth was talking about. Yes, correct.
Correct.
All right. Well, it's 5:17, and I'm going to go ahead and close this item 3, with my thanks to the staff. As I said last night, nobody wants to do this. To crib from Councilmember Filseth, there isn't much joy here, but there is a responsibility, and I appreciate the professionalism with which the staff has brought this forward and their willingness to set aside a chunk of money for us to figure out what we need to fix in the process. It's not easy, but we'll have a lot of opportunities to work together to sort that out. And now we move to future meetings and agendas. I think we've probably covered this ad nauseum, but Ms. Nose, would you have anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. I will say just one point of order that as we were discussing all of this, one thing that the committee may want to consider as we're moving through this is these kind of strategic issues that we've aired as we move through the process to perhaps as a committee, if you find consensus or want to handle them as referrals along the way, that would be helpful for staff, especially if there's going to be additional information that this committee is requesting from us. That way we can work through that information as we move through this iterative process. I will say if it's not addressed as part of the multi-item agendas, we obviously will be resyncing as a whole at the end of May 12th, which will have appointed offices, internal service departments, and frankly, non-departmental, which is kind of that catch-all which has all different aspects, including the reserves, the revenue estimates, and the like. So that might be another place to focus if we need to on some of these larger issues. So and I think Mr. Shikata has some additional help on that.
Sure, thanks. If I could just bookend what Director Nozay just said with a recognition of two things. One is that I think as Councilmember Philseth pointed out, some of these issues have been discussed recently, and so we have perhaps a few ongoing referrals that have already been assigned. So as the discussions come forward, I think we can highlight those. The other is, to the extent that they might be new, I would put a marker down to recognize that, as unpopular as it may be, that there may need to be some resources set aside to evaluate some of these larger strategic issues that, again, has been acknowledged, may take some time and effort to evaluate. And again, I don't have any particular ones in mind, but just do want to put that marker down as much as anything else, because when the departments come forward with their proposals and are told, well, how about you take a big picture look at changing your business model entirely, that to mitigate some of the nervous breakdowns that we may see real time, to acknowledge that we do recognize that it may take some special resources and carving out a little separate effort aside from the running of the departments that may be necessary in order to pursue that work.
All right, thank you to the city manager. With that, we will adjourn. We'll reconvene on Tuesday, May 11th at 9 a.m. Everybody have a nice evening.